tabloid. Is this the end of the world? I mean, this is...
All right, we apparently have lost our satellite to London, where Christiane Amanpour was just giving us the British reaction to the catastrophe that the United States witnessed yesterday. We will hope to bring her back a little bit later this morning. She also gave us some insights as to how the Prime Minister is dealing with this. He just very recently had a long conversation, 20-minute conversation with President Bush, as there is continued talk about what kind of collective effort needs to be made to fight this brand of terrorism. Let's catch up with Kira Phillips right now, that has some more thoughts on how the nation will continue to react to what happened in Pennsylvania yesterday, what happened at the Pentagon, and the twin attacks here in New York City. Kira?
Paula, thank you. Reaction is definitely the key word here. We're going to take you actually live to Logan Airport, and that is where two of the hijacked planes came from. We're going to turn it over to our Bill Delaney, who's live at the command center there. Bill, can you tell us what's happening right now within the center?
Well, thank you, Kira. Hundreds of federal, state, and local police, led by the FBI, now fanning out here in the Boston area to try to determine how these hijackers could have gotten on the two planes that left Boston yesterday morning and ended up crashing into the World Trade Center. The question, was there some kind of a terrorist cell here in Boston that enabled these hijackers to lay the groundwork for what they did? Now, a security expert I spoke to here this morning, Kira, said in many ways Boston is an ideal place for that sort of thing. It is a small city but a major city, and importantly, it's near an international border, Canada. Now, we know before the millennium, an Algerian was arrested on the Vermont border. This Algerian found to have ties to another Algerian who tried at that time to cross into Washington State for a terrorist action at the time of the millennium in Seattle. So we've seen that sort of thing here before. Also, we don't know if Arabs were involved in this, but if they were, there is a sizable Arab community here in Boston. It's a place one could obtain some anonymity, this security source said to me. Now, there are reports here, Kira, this morning of several suspects being looked at who may have been involved in this hijacking. The Boston Herald newspaper reporting 2 brothers may have been involved, both carrying United Arab Emirates passports, one of them a trained pilot. Also, importantly, Kira, a rented car taken from the central parking garage here at Logan Airport yesterday. Now, this rented car reportedly contained Arab language training manuals for flying a commercial aircraft. Now, the authorities focused on this car because a passenger who left here on a flight from Boston yesterday, when he arrived at his destination and found out about the terrorist actions, realized that he had had an altercation with several Arab men in the central parking garage. He called authorities, and they are looking at this vehicle. I should also mention that earlier this year, the FBI did determine that in the late 90s there were Arab men here, 2 with ties to the Osama bin Laden organization. They left suddenly in the late 90s, but one of them, a man named Bassam Kanj, had lived here for some 15 years working as a cab driver. He was subsequently killed in Lebanon in an attack on the Lebanese army, financed, security sources believe, by Osama bin Laden. The other Arab, Rail Hijazi, also was a cab driver here in Boston. He is in jail in Jordan for an involvement in a plan to blow up a hotel in Jordan that contained mostly American and Israeli tourists at the time of the millennium. So there have been traces of people tied to Osama bin Laden, if indeed Osama bin Laden was involved in this in the past here in Boston. And as I say, hundreds of federal, state, and local investigators now trying to sort out how hijackers got on those 2 planes here at Logan Airport yesterday.
Our Bill Delaney, thank you very much. Those are definitely riveting details. We'll continue to follow up with you at Logan Airport. Miles, we're going to take it back over to you at the desk.
All right, thank you very much, Kira. Live pictures from the Pentagon right now. Let's take a look at the scene that is unfolding as the effort there continues. Not a lot of hope this morning. Matter of fact, no hope of finding any survivors inside the wreckage there of the Army side of the Pentagon. 5-sided building, obviously 5 stories. Some portions of it are opened, and some portion of the 20,000 workers who typically report there every day are at work there on what is, of course, not a normal day, but the routine will try to continue. There was immediately before we took this live image, there was a convoy of vehicles. There you see them. This is a tape image which came down just a few moments ago. Convoy of vehicles there. We can presume they are part of the effort to continue the salvage efforts there at the Pentagon. We'll keep you posted as events unfold there. Back now to a live picture. Let's do a quick recap. It has now been 24 hours since the nightmare began and everything really changed. Today we are revealing more evidence of just how horrific it all was. In New York this morning, a frantic search and rescue effort continues. Crews have found some survivors amid the rubble of what was the World Trade Center. We underscore that point. Leveled the World Trade Center. Authorities tell CNN at least 9 people have been found alive this morning, but the death toll from the terrorist attacks is expected to be staggering. All we know now is it will be in the thousands. The horror began to unfold 24 hours ago as a plane tore through the first of the World Trade Center towers. This picture came in overnight. It's a different angle on it. Ripped into the building, created a huge fireball. That was American Airlines Flight 11, a 767 with 81 passengers, 11 crew members. It was supposed to fly from Boston to Los Angeles, somewhere over the Adirondack Mountains. It took a sharp detour to the south. Now, 18 minutes later, a second jet slammed in to the other tower of the World Trade Center, both of them 110 stories high. This is United Flight 175. Also point of origin was Boston, also intended destination of Los Angeles. Both of those aircraft heavily laden with fuel for the transcontinental flight. 56 passengers, 9 crew members on board that plane. We've had reports from cellular telephone conversations that were managed to be delivered from these planes that there were knife-wielding suspects who commandeered these aircraft and were at the controls of the aircraft at the time. Now, both World Trade Center towers, of course, eventually collapsed. Here, as we see right here, the second tower imploding. That was at about 10 o'clock Eastern time yesterday. Those the gleaming symbols of New York for more than 20 years now, symbol of our wealth, symbol of U.S. prosperity. All of it now reduced to rubble today, and there are 5 sub-floors there. And earlier in our reporting, Gary Tuckman was indicating there is some hope that there may be additional survivors deep beneath that rubble. An amazing Herculean effort underway right now to try to find people who might be alive in that pile of rubble, many thousands of tons. At the Pentagon this morning, firefighters poured more water on the smoldering building damaged by the suicide plane attack. That was American Airlines Flight 77, 757, Dulles to Los Angeles, its intended destination. 58 passengers, 6 crew members, 800 people killed in that particular attack. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld says the Pentagon is in fact open for business today. We should say portions of the Pentagon, those deemed fit and those deemed safe for occupants. But the concern about that structural integrity will keep everybody out but the essential personnel, at least for today. Still no word on exactly how many people were injured total in that attack. We are getting ballpark estimates of, as we said, 800 people killed in that attack. The attack at the heart of the U.S. financial center is reverberating throughout world markets today. In Japan, the Nikkei average plunged below 10,000 for the first time in 17 years. European stock market averages are undergoing sharp price swings today. Most opened lower and showed some gains before moving lower again. U.S. financial markets will remain closed today. The World Trade Center is, of course, at the heart of the financial district for this country. Across the U.S., there are some cases of soaring gas prices, which we could probably infer to be a bit of profiteering. In some places, the price jumped to nearly $5 a gallon. The nation's largest oil companies are trying to ease fears by pledging to keep distribution steady. That brings you up to date this morning on a morning that will be a morning that we are forever changed. Send it back to Paula Zahn in New York. Paula?
Miles, I want to try to give you an idea of what life is actually like in New York City today, drastically different from an average weekday. As you look at the streets, there is a fraction of the traffic you'd normally see. You'd usually see bumper-to-bumper traffic at that corner at this time of the morning. The reason for this is that all public schools are closed, private schools, parochial schools. The Dow Jones is closed, the NASDAQ is closed. All businesses south of 14th Street, which is not far from this platform, are closed today. You still have bridges and tunnels, inbound bridges and tunnels closed at this hour. So you might describe the city as in a state of paralysis. Many companies advising their workers to stay at home today. And as folks stay at home, they're just beginning to come to grips with how their city has changed. I want to go to Gary Tuckman right now, who has gotten closer than just about anyone this morning to that perimeter area surrounding the World Trade Center. Gary, can you give us an update now on any of the rescues underway?
Well, first of all, Paul, it was 24 hours close to this very moment that the United Airlines plane went through the South Tower of the World Trade Center. And that's where the South Tower used to stand. You can see the skeleton of it right now. And in the foreground, you see dozens of members of the Army National Guard who are now on the streets of Lower Manhattan here, protecting New York City at the site we never thought we'd ever see in New York City, let alone the United States. Members of the National Guard like this standing out there with their helmets on, guns on their sides. But that's the situation here right now in Lower Manhattan on the corner of Church and Reed Street, normally a very busy place. This would be morning rush hour. Now it's quiet. No members of the public are allowed out here right now. It's just emergency officials, police, the Army National Guard, and some members of the media who've gotten as close as we can. We are using right now a video telephone because we're in a place where we can't use our normal live truck to give you a live signal, and that's why we have this particular signal with you right now. And with us right now is an officer who's been on the scene for more than 12 hours. This is Officer Wayne Diana. He's with the South Plainfield, New Jersey Police Department. Sir, tell me what the scene was like for you.
We got in, they bust us in from New Jersey into Staten Island, and they brought us over on the ferry. We started out at the lower end and walked up. We wound up in Ground Zero at about sometime, I guess, around midnight, searching for survivors. Myself and two other officers from my department were in the alley in the road between the two towers. We spent about 4 or 5 hours going through vehicles, looking under vehicles. At one point we got into I guess it would be the South Tower. The second floor of the South Tower, there's a daycare center, apparently employee daycare center. We searched through there, we found nothing. Apparently those people were able to get out. It's a war zone. It's an absolute war zone. It's the worst thing I've ever seen.
How many people would you say are down there right now?
Rescue workers, thousands. They're just all over the place. I mean, the city has come together. Every possible city agency you could think of is down there. Private contractors in there with heavy equipment moving huge pieces of building and steel, and police cars and fire trucks that are wrecked down there. They're in the process of moving those out now with forklifts. It's going to be a long operation.
We've reported that 9 survivors have been found, 6 of them members of the New York City Fire Department, 3 Port Authority of New York and New Jersey police officers. Did you see any survivors?
We didn't see anybody. We had already pulled out of the Ground Zero area before that rescue operation concluded. We went back a couple blocks outside of the Ground Zero area and went to sleep on the sidewalk. We slept for about 2 or 3 hours, and we came back in. It's a very frustrating effort because there's just so much debris that you can't get near where the people who may have survived the explosion are.
Frustrating and frightening. How horrible has this been for you?
It's scary. It's scary. Life as you and I know it has changed in this country. I mean, we've always felt that the United States of America was the safest place in the world, and we're wondering now whether that's still the case.
Officer, thanks for joining us. Good work out there for the last 12 hours. I want to clarify the damage that occurred here. We all know that the 2 big towers, the 110-story towers, 1 World Trade Center and 2 World Trade Center both came down. We are told that when 1 World Trade Center came down, it fell on a smaller building called the 4 World Trade Center building. And then many of you know yesterday afternoon, the 7 World Trade Center building, another 47-story building, also came down. So 4 of the World Trade Center buildings in the complex have been destroyed. Paula, back to you.
Gary, there is so much we've heard over the last 24 hours. You made it clear. It literally was just about 24 hours that the second hijacked airliner slammed into South Tower, trapping thousands of people inside before the building collapsed. There's so much we've heard to absolutely sicken us. But I think that the one piece of information that has really affected New Yorkers is the fact that some 250 New York firefighters are presumed dead. Among those, New York City's fire chief, its deputy fire chief, some 85 New York City police officers missing. What kind of impact does that have on the morale of these rescue workers who are in extremely challenging situations?
It has a multi-dimensional impact. First of all, they are very sad and very depressed. Obviously, in any situation like this, you would see some very serious police officers and firefighters. But many of these people have told us they have lost their friends. They believe they've lost their friends. And we have seen in many cases, many of them crying. But multidimensional because it also makes them more determined. They want to find their friends. Obviously, they want to find civilians who are inside that building too, but they are hoping and praying with all their might that they find people who they've worked with for many years and find that they've survived. Paula?
All right, thanks so much, Gary. Once again, Gary reporting that in total, some 9 folks have been rescued, some 6 firefighters, 1 Port Authority police officer, that was in the wee hours of the morning, and 2 police officers last night. And city officials are hopeful that 2 more folks trapped inside will successfully be rescued. One of those victims actually establishing cell phone contact with his family. Gary Tuckman will continue to keep us posted on that. Once again, he is closer to any of the information sources than anybody else on this story. Right now, I'm going to check in with Hillary Lane, who joins us from St. Vincent's Hospital, one of the critical centers that took in victims all day yesterday, last night. Hillary, give us an update as to what your hospital's dealing with at the moment.
Well, Paula, at about 7:45 Eastern Time this morning, officials here at St. Vincent's got a phone call that there had been survivors found in the rubble, as Gary has been reporting. The staff here geared up. If you take a look behind me, you can see that there are numbers of doctors and nurses and emergency personnel on standby. But in the past hour or so, only one person brought in. That was a man who collapsed immediately onto a stretcher and was wheeled into the hospital. And what really seems to be the story here, in the words of one doctor, it is catastrophic. In the words of another, disappointing and absolutely sobering, is that there are so many people standing around and so few patients who have been brought in. The numbers at this point, 365. Only about 40 of those brought in overnight. The majority of those brought in were firefighters and rescue personnel. There have been 4 fatalities brought here, 1 to an affiliated hospital. A short while ago, we heard from one of the paramedics who had been on the scene as of 9 a.m. yesterday morning, and here is how he described it.
Initially, I was there for about 15 minutes. There were a couple explosions. It became dangerous. We grabbed one person, we commandeered an ambulance, and just hightailed it out of there. My prayers are to the fellow firefighters, EMS, police officers that have died, and hopefully we'll be able to get some more out of there. We weren't able to get to the scene simply because it was very unsafe. So please, if you can, everybody, please pray for those that have fallen today.
Now, major burn cases have been some of the most serious injuries here, and doctors say those were people who were able to make it out on their own yesterday. And if you take a look at the rubble, you can see the delicate situation that the rescue workers have to go through in order to extricate anybody who might be alive. They are cheered anytime that they do receive some sort of communication. Some of it has been by cell phone, but those cases are few and far between. What one of the hospital officials here was telling me earlier is that the paramedics say that they stop about every 45 minutes and they check in for sounds. They use special dogs to see if they can hear anything, if they can smell anything. Yeah, let you take a look. There's an ambulance pulling up behind me and shouts that there may be one of the firefighters inside. I can't confirm that for you at this point, but people moving into action here as they wait for any survivors to be brought in. Triple the staff than usual in the emergency room, ready to handle any of the victims. And doctors here are saying that the sort of casualties they're likely to see here today are going to be far worse than anything that they have seen yesterday. As I mentioned earlier, that first phone call came in at about 7:45 with word that some of these rescued personnel might be on their way in here. Doctors were then saying that they hadn't seen anything at that point. They may have been transferred over to other centers to handle burns, maybe up to the trauma unit at Cornell or over to Bellevue perhaps. So that is the story here. Very, very sobering to these people who are waiting to treat the victims, and very telling that many more victims have not been brought in. Paula?
Hillary Lane, thanks so much for that update. As I hear you heard your report, I guess I'm reminded that none of us are supposed to inject our own personal feelings in covering these stories, but you can't help but have a great deal of respect for the way volunteers are dealing with the carnage that has been wrought in this city. We had told you earlier this morning we expected Mayor Giuliani to hold a news conference. It has been delayed. We were expecting that about 45 minutes ago. We were told now it will get started shortly, and we'll go to that live. But once again, the level of support shown for the victims here is extraordinary. The scene you just saw playing out at St. Vincent's Hospital is being repeated all over the city, with doctors from neighboring hospitals trying to get in the city. In fact, it's difficult to get into the city today because there are a number of inbound bridges that are still closed. They're trying to get here to volunteer their services. People are trying to donate blood. There are reports even this morning of lines continuing to wrap around blocks of people trying to help out. In one of the more disturbing stories that's being reported, a barge last night actually carried some of the dead from New York into New Jersey. There are reports of cab companies literally ripping seats of their vans to actually carry the dead to New Jersey as well. We've heard a number of paramedics reinforce the fact that makeshift morgues are being set up all over the city. But the bottom line is, and I am sure that the mayor will probably reiterate this morning, no one, Miles, has any idea of the magnitude of loss in this city. There is hope downtown this morning, as you just heard Gary report, that 9 firefighters and police officers have been rescued from the rubble. There is hope that 2 more rescues will be successfully pulled off. But the fact is, what the mayor said last night will probably be true. And his words, quote, the deaths will be very, very high. The death toll, quote, horrendous. So, Miles, maybe some of this will become clearer later today. I doubt it, though, because once again, I think Gary Tuckman has made it quite clear from those rubble pictures how difficult it is for rescue workers to even get into this area. Miles?
All right. Thank you very much, Paula. Undoubtedly, it'll be a very difficult number to fathom. We should let you know that in about 7 minutes' time or so, officials at the Los Angeles International Airport will be holding a news briefing. 3 of the 4 hijacked flights were destined for Los Angeles, and we hope to bring you live coverage of that. That also lies ahead. Let's move now to Capitol Hill. Yesterday on Capitol Hill, a lot of tough talk and at least one touching moment. The tough talk coming from members of Congress vowing for retaliation, singling out Osama bin Laden and his organization as the group responsible for these attacks. The touching moment coming on the steps of the Capitol as members of Congress broke into song, singing God Bless America, a moment I will never forget. Let's turn it now to Kate Snow, where she will tell us about the U.S. House of Representatives going to gavel to session, and a symbolic session, right, Kate?
That's right, and the Senate as well, Miles. At 10 o'clock this morning, they will be gaveling back in here. In fact, they never went out of session last night. Yesterday, they were evacuated, but they technically never stopped meeting, and that's an important point to make. Let me tell you first about the security situation here, Miles. There is a perimeter set up around the United States Capitol, 1 block east and west of the Capitol behind me, 2 blocks to the north, 2 blocks to the south. They're checking IDs. They're letting in people who work in the buildings here, staff, and obviously members members of Congress starting now to come back. We have seen some joggers, some people walking their dogs around this area, so we know they're also letting people in on foot. Whether they're going to let tourists into the United States Capitol for tours today is still being decided. Normally there's a huge line of tourists out here by this hour. Miles, this morning there's hardly anyone here in the way of tourists. Let me tell you also that clearly there is an effort to show that it is business as usual here in the Capitol this morning. At 10 o'clock this morning, as we've mentioned, the House and the Senate will reconvene. They will both be in their chambers, at least for a short period of time. The Senate plans to debate a resolution and give 10 minutes to every U.S. senator to speak on the floor. That translates into about 16 hours worth of talk that we're going to hear out of the senators today. On the House side, they're going to come in, they're going to come back a little bit later this afternoon and debate the same resolution. This is a resolution condemning yesterday's actions. We also understand that the House members and the Senate members are going to receive a closed-door briefing at some point this afternoon from intelligence officials, perhaps from the FBI, perhaps from the CIA. All night long, Miles, the dome light on the very top of the Capitol has been burning here. That's because, as I mentioned, the Congress never officially went out of session. That light that you see at the top of your frame is always on when the Congress is in session. It's a technical thing, but it's also a very symbolic thing. Last night, that shone all night long. The leadership, as you mentioned, appeared on the steps of the Capitol to send a message. Republicans and Democrats last night speaking with one voice.
We will stand together to make sure that those who have brought forth this evil deed will pay the price. As the representatives of the people, we are here to declare that our resolve has not been weakened by these horrific and cowardly acts.
The message has to be that we're going to hunt you down and we're going to find you and we're going to make you pay that price.
America was hit today, but this government of the American people, for the American people, is back up on its feet. And we are functioning, and we are going to go forward together.
The leaders of Congress will meet this morning with President Bush at 11:30 at the White House. We also understand that those leaders were in hiding yesterday for some period of time. There's about 9 leaders between the House and the Senate, 5 from the House, 4 from the Senate, who are the highest ranking people in this body of government. They all went to a secure location. We've learned some more details about that, Miles. 2 by 2, they were taken by helicopter to an underground location. Speaker of the House Hastert was taken earlier in the day, right after the plane crashed into the Pentagon. He was immediately taken away from the Capitol. About 3 hours later, the rest of the leadership was taken to that secure location. They sat together for several hours watching television together, we're told. I'm told by one aide that it was a grim situation, and I'm also told by that same aide that they were a very bipartisan group. This aide saying they're bipartisan now. I expect that will carry over in the business in the coming days. Miles.
CNN's Kate Snow on Capitol Hill, thank you very much. We've just learned that President Bush will be holding a meeting of his national security team in about 2 minutes' time in the Cabinet Room at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. He will be making a statement to the media. We'll, of course, bring that to you as soon as we get that videotape, as soon as we capture that. Kelly Wallace is manning our post at the White House this morning from the North Lawn. Kelly, this meeting, they'll be discussing the parameters of response, undoubtedly. Can you give us any insights as to what is being discussed right now?
Well, that is going to be the opportunity for the president to get the most up-to-date briefing on the investigation into who could be responsible for these attacks, as well as for the search and recovery efforts, because a big focus for the administration today is that the administration, the U.S. government, is doing everything it can to assist with recovery efforts in New York, in Pennsylvania, and of course outside Washington, D.C. at the Pentagon. So you will obviously hear the president talk about that. In fact, we understand he will be calling on the American people to do their part and to step forward and donate blood. There will in fact be a blood drive here at the White House, a bloodmobile pulling into the White House driveway earlier today. But again, as you noted, a big focus, just who might be responsible for these attacks. Now, Miles, U.S. officials publicly and even really privately not speculating at this time who they think might be responsible. U.S. Secretary of State Colin Powell on the air earlier today saying that he doesn't think it will be too long before the U.S. government is confident it does know who is responsible. But as we've been reporting, senior officials did brief key members of Congress last night. Some of those members talking to some of my colleagues at CNN, those members saying U.S. officials confident that the evidence right now pointing to affiliates or associates of Osama bin Laden. One other thing I want to show you, Miles, really a picture that sort of captures the mood here at the White House. As you would expect, the flag at half-staff on top of the White House and on top of the Eisenhower Executive Office building. Really a measure and a reflection of the tragedy felt all across the United States on this day. Another note, as Kate mentioning, members of Congress coming over here to the White House to meet with the president. This is an opportunity to show that Democrats, Republicans, all united behind the president. And one other note, security quite tight here at the White House, still very much on a high state of alert. Miles, back to you.
CNN's Kelly Wallace at the White House. Thank you very much. Once again, the president will meet with his national security team right about now, and we should be hearing from them a statement to the tight pool, if you will, of press reporters that will be allowed into the cabinet room at 10:45 a.m. Eastern Time. We will get that to you as soon as we receive it. Let's turn it now to David Ensor, who is in our Washington bureau with a bit of breaking news. David.
Well, Miles, I want to be very careful how I put this, but U.S. officials confirm that 3 planes in the airspace of Western Canada near Vancouver are currently being tracked by Canadian officials, by the Canadian Air Force and ground officials, and it's unclear what these aircraft are up to. They are attempting to ascertain who's flying them, and chances are, officials say, that there's nothing to this, nothing nefarious. You're probably going to hear a lot of these kinds of reports. The airspace of the entire North American continent is now being watched very closely by thousands of people. But nonetheless, we can confirm that there are 3 aircraft that they are still trying. The Canadian officials are still trying to identify, figure out who they are, why they're up there. They expect to very soon be able to report that there's nothing untoward about this, but at this point they are not able to do so. So those 3 aircraft are being tracked very closely, according to U.S. officials, Miles.
David, cognizant of the delicacy of this situation, do we know them to be large aircraft, airliners, or are they general aviation aircraft?
We have no additional information beyond what I've just told you, except to say that it is a tracking effort by the Canadian Air Force as well as Canadian civilian authorities. Being taken very seriously up there, but as I say, U.S. officials believe they will shortly be able to announce that there's nothing to this, but given the level of alert now, anything like this is being watched closely, Miles.
And David, just to clarify one point in my mind, that unprecedented grounding of all aircraft in the United States yesterday, did that apply in any way to Canada?
My understanding is there were some parts of Canada, particularly along the border, that where airports were grounded. A lot of planes were rerouted to there, of course, from the United States. Canada has been very closely cooperating with U.S. officials in the effort to get to the bottom of this and to retrack aircraft if need be. So they are now in constant communication with U.S. officials here in Washington and elsewhere on these 3 aircraft, and as I say, they're hoping to be able to ascertain very soon that there's nothing nefarious to them. But they haven't done so yet. Miles.
CNN's David Ensor, who covers national security for us, joining us from our Washington bureau. And we should just underscore the point that this is a story that is unfolding as we speak, and there will be many dead ends as we go down the road here. Bear with us as you join with us in the news gathering process, if you will. Let's turn it back now to Paula Zahn in New York. Paula.
All right, thanks, Miles. I need to mention that a bunch of us up here on the platform have just sighted what we believe to be a military jet doing some kind of flyover. In light of what David Ensor is reporting, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense when he is describing, his report made sense describing the activity in Canada, but this jet was traveling south and slightly east of here, appeared over Fifth Avenue. We have no idea what the relevance of that flight is, but it clearly was a military jet. Some folks on here who are very good at identifying military aircraft thought it was an F-16. We will try to confirm whether it was and what it all means. But right now, I have the honor of joining King Abdullah of Jordan, now for his reaction to what has happened here in the United States. Your Majesty, thank you very much for joining us today. Do you have any idea who is responsible for this massacre in the United States?
I think at this stage it is too early to tell. Obviously, the international community, Jordan included, is working very closely with the United States to try and come up with some answers as quickly as possible. But I'm sure in a very short period of time we'll be able to identify the individuals or the organizations that were behind this very barbaric act.
What kind of intelligence support are you providing the United States?
Well, many countries in the Middle East, as well as further afield, are working closely together with the different agencies in the United States to compare information. And this is not just because of the crisis. This is something that has been going on for many years. But obviously, everybody's in their offices working night and day to try and get to the bottom of this horrendous crime as quickly as possible.
And in what way is Jordan attempting to combat terrorism right now?
Well, obviously, Jordan has been working very closely with the United States for many years due to the unfortunate experiences that our country have gone through. And we have a very close working relationship between the security services, the intelligence communities of both countries. But again, I think you must understand that on combating international terrorism is actually a combined effort by many countries all over the world, and we're just part of that effort.
As I understand it, you were halfway across the Atlantic on your way to the United States and your jet turned around. What else can you tell us about that?
Well, really, we were almost coming towards the coastline of Nova Scotia when we got the information of the first incident of the first aircraft hitting one of the towers. And as the information began to unfold, obviously we did feel like we wanted to continue to the United States. Air traffic was a problem at that point. And obviously we realized that the government and the federal agencies were going to have their hands full because of the tragic circumstances. So it was better to return home at that point. But all of us here in Jordan would like to share in the sorrow and the grief that has befallen the United States, and particularly the families of the victims involved.
A number of world leaders, including yourself, have condemned this attack. Yasser Arafat yesterday condemning the attack. What is your reaction to some of the Palestinians yesterday in East Jerusalem and in the West Bank who were celebrating these attacks in the United States as a victory against Israel?
Well, I think we were here in Jordan just as shocked as you are. But again, as you said, a small group, and I think this is a small group of individuals that we're celebrating, and in no way is a reflection of the Palestinian people or the peoples of the Middle East. I think all of us are shocked and saddened and distraught that so many innocent people have been hurt or killed in this devastating incident. And we all have families, and just to think of putting ourselves in the shoes of those bereaved ones in the United States, I think has touched everybody. I have friends of mine in New York. I spent yesterday on the airplane trying to call my friends to make sure they were all right. I think all of us have been touched by this incident, and I hope that this is a renewed effort now by the international community to really be able to work much stronger together. There's a lot more that we can do to break down the barriers of cooperation between different countries, to try and rid ourselves of this horrendous form of international terrorism.
Your Majesty, do you think U.S. policy in the region made the United States vulnerable to this attack?
I believe that many countries in the world have been target for terrorist organizations. As I said, this is not a phenomenon of this week. The United States and the international community has been battling terrorism for several decades now. And again, it must be pointed out that this is an ongoing battle that happens every day. And I'm somewhat surprised that something like this had not happened sooner. I mean, the law of averages, sooner or later, the bad guys are going to get one through. And, you know, we have to understand that. And I hope America has, and I'm sure it will have the strength and determination to pick ourselves up and really take the fight back to the terrorists and those responsible for the heinous crimes that we saw perpetrated yesterday.
So it sounds to me, Your Majesty, and I have to do this briefly, that in essence you're saying perhaps even if, as one of our guests suggested earlier today, peace had been achieved in July of 2000, this still, in the Middle East, this still might have happened.
I don't believe so, because I think that if you had solved the problems of the Middle East, and obviously the core issue is that between the Israelis and Palestinians, I doubt very much that this incident would have taken place. And again, that was a reminder to all of us, and why I think so many of us in the international community have been working so hard to bring a stop to the violence and bring people back to the peace process, because in a vacuum, you do allow the extremists the upper hand and a chance to try things as was happened yesterday. And they will continue on trying until we can solve the problem once and for all.
King Abdullah, it is an honor to have you join us here at CNN. We very much appreciate your time. Thank you again for joining us. Right now we're going to head back to Atlanta, where Miles O'Brien is standing by. Miles, there's been a flurry of siren activity down below. We have no idea, again, what the significance of that is, or the significance of the military jet that made a pass over south early this morning. But we'll try to figure out what all that means and bring that information to you.
All right. Paula keeping us posted from New York. The Pentagon was built immediately after World War II and then stood impervious during all those Cold War years. And today, at least one face of it lies a charred ruin. Several hundred people killed as the third aircraft to strike hit yesterday morning. Ken Bacon is a former Pentagon spokesperson. First of all, thanks for being with us. And if you could just share with us your reaction to what you've seen unfold.
Well, I was horrified like everybody else. Friends of mine were in that building, but I think the most important thing to focus on today is that the building is still operating. I understand that 2/3 of the 24,000 people who normally work in the Pentagon are there today carrying on operations, and I think this is a strong symbol of American resolve and resilience.
The attack, obviously, a strong symbol of the defiance of these terrorists. This must in some way shake and rattle the people who work inside that building and all the people they represent in the U.S. military at large.
Well, of course, literally and figuratively shake and rattle. But the fact of the matter is that the people who are in the military today, serving our nation, understand that they're at risk. They understand this when they join the military. This is not the type of risk they anticipated, but they anticipate that they will face risk. I think that the important thing is that they're back at work, they're ready to do their job, and respond to any instructions they get from the President.
As we look at some pictures from lower Manhattan today, as the effort begins there, hard to even comprehend the amount of the Herculean task that lies ahead to find possibly additional survivors, and then of course just begin the forensic process. I'm curious, you've been privy to the behind the closed door meetings that occur in the wake of something like this. What's being said? What's being laid out on the table as the options for the current White House?
Okay, first of all, at the Pentagon itself, there are three priorities: care for the casualties, limit the damage, and maintain operations. And I think that Secretary Rumsfeld's quick run down to the bombed area yesterday showed that he was paying attention to the casualties. Then he went right back to the command center. Right now, what the Pentagon is doing is working with, carries on the operations and takes care of the casualties, tries to stop the burning. It is working with the intelligence agencies to try to figure out who's responsible for this, what I consider to be an act of war against our National Military Command Center, and two, to present the President with a list of options that he can invoke, from which he can choose in making a response.
Mr. Bacon, you know, at the risk of doing some Wednesday morning quarterbacking here, if you will, there's been a lot of criticism of the intelligence community in the wake of this. There always is in the wake of a terrorist attack like this. Cognizant of the fact that we talk about, you know, literally the fog of war, do you think there was a misstep? Was there a lack of communication that made this attack possible?
I don't think it's, well, clearly something went wrong. We know that to begin with. But I don't think it's fair right now to point fingers or cast aspersions on any part of our intelligence community. We need to get more facts. We depend on a series of defenses, on perimeter defenses, and one of them is airport security. Clearly there was a lapse of airport security here. But what more happened, what signals we might have missed, is too early to tell right now. What we can say is we as a nation have been working very hard for the last 5 or 10 years to improve our responses to terrorism. We've made considerable progress. Clearly, we have to do more.
If you were still involved in your former role as the spokesperson for the Defense Department at the Pentagon, what would you be advising your bosses to do today and in the coming days?
I'd advise them to do what they've done, to be forthright with the American public, to present information as soon as they're certain of that information.
Mr. Bacon, my apologies. I have to interrupt you. We're going to go to New York now. Mayor Rudy Giuliani with a news conference. Let's listen in.
Good morning. We just completed a long meeting with all of the agencies of the city, state, governor, participated in it, and the Port Authority, so that we can work on the things that we have to do today to, first of all, focus our efforts on recovering as many people as we can and save lives. Second, try to begin the removal of debris to that area of the city, which is going to be a task that goes on for at least 2 or 3 weeks. And then focus on the other issues that are of importance to the city. Make sure that food comes into the city, make sure that people are able to go about their lives and are taken care of in the hospitals, and to try to bring the city back to normal as soon as possible. And we're going to aim to try to do that for the rest of Manhattan starting tomorrow. And we'll be focusing on that and trying to accomplish that all day today. We have been successful in recovering at least one other person, Port Authority police officer. We're hopefully going to be able to recover a fourth one, and we're in the process of doing everything we can to try to locate other people, and that'll be the major focus of our attention. We'd also appeal to since some came forward late yesterday and last evening. If they do, please contact the police department and the FBI, because it could be of enormous help in the investigation of the case. We're going to try to open schools tomorrow. We're hopeful that we'll be able to, we certainly will be able to do it in the entire city, and we'll be working on a plan for the maximum number of schools that we can open on the east side of Manhattan, particularly the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Con Edison is working, I think, as intensely as they possibly can to try to get power restored. It's going to take some time, and we're bringing generators in. The governor made available to us a group of generators that we've moved to Randall's Island, and we will be using them in that area of the east side that needs generator power, because they may need it for quite some time. We were able to move 120 dump trucks out of the city last night, which will give you a sense of the work that was done overnight. So some of the debris has already been removed. More of it is being removed, and it'll be done by barge all throughout the day today. The subway system is operating in all of the city, but below 14th Street, and largely because right now we have that closed. So If you're in any of the other 4 boroughs, public transportation is normal, the subways are normal, the buses are normal. If you're in Manhattan, the subways are going to be working to 14th Street, and then for those that go underneath, they'll just go straight out to Brooklyn. As soon as we can get that area of the city open, however, there will be subway service there, except for the 1, 2, and 3 lines, the West Side IRT below 34th Street, because of the collapse that took place. And again, we ask all New Yorkers to cooperate and to try to help each other. There are going to be a lot of people today who need help and need assistance, either because of the fact that they know people that were lost in this terrible tragedy, or because they're just frightened of what may happen. If you could comfort them and help them and assist them, particularly elderly people, that might be a way in which you can contribute. And we're getting very, very close cooperation from the state, from the federal government. I think people in New York, the best way they can deal with this right now is not only to deal with their own grief, which we all feel and have, but to show that we're not going to be in any way affected by this, that we're not going to be cowed by it, that we're not afraid, that we're going to go about our business and lead normal lives and not let these cowards affect us in any way like they're trying to do, which is to instill fear in us. Governor?
Mayor, thank you. As the mayor indicated, the focus right now is still on search and rescue in the hopes that we can get other people out of the debris and save more lives. We have, at last count, 18 different search and rescue teams down there. And I want to thank my colleagues. We have 8 from Connecticut that Governor Rowland sent in, others from around the country. We have a specialized team coming that Governor Calderon is sending from Puerto Rico. And it's this type of support from around the country that is allowing us to get through this. I have to tell you, I was down at the scene last night, and Mayor, your police and fire not only were heroes at the beginning, but they're still heroes. They're down there under enormous personal strain and risk. I saw them at the ground zero while a high-rise was on fire right across the street that could have collapsed, and they are risking their lives to try to save their friends and their colleagues and the New Yorkers who are still trapped. And we have to thank them, say a prayer for them. This is a time for rescue, it's a time for commitment, but it's also a time to reflect and grieve for those who didn't have their parents come home last night, or for those who still might be lost. And we will get through this because, as the mayor indicated, New Yorkers come together in times of crisis, and we've seen tremendous spirit donating blood, volunteering at hospitals, helping us to get through this. And we have done everything we could to be supportive. We have National Guard troops here now. We are mobilizing fire departments from Westchester and Rockland that are backing up in the Bronx. We're mobilizing fire departments from Nassau and Suffolk that will help in some of the outer boroughs on Long Island. But what we don't need are people just simply coming in to volunteer. We have the hotlines, we have the organization, we have tremendous coordination between the city and the state and the federal government. So people who want to exercise their expertise, whether they're firefighters, they should contact the fire department. If they're EMTs or nurses, they should contact the hotline that we have set up at the state, where we've already had about 10,000 calls. So this is a tragic episode in American history, but New Yorkers will get through this. America will get through this. We will not be intimidated. We will not lose our freedom.
What is the status of the World Trade?
There's one other thing that we should do. These are the flight recorder boxes that the firefighters and the police officers and the rescuers are looking for, and we're going to we'll give you copies of this. We'd like you to put it out as broadly as possible. We're giving copies to all the rescue people and recovery people, so that they can try to find them. Altogether there'll be 4, 2 for each airplane, and that's what they look like, except it'll be obviously covered with soot and dirt. But there are a lot of people involved in the recovery and relief effort who know what they're looking for, and then there'll be some that don't. So if we can give those out, it would be very important. This morning's meeting was devoted to the relief and recovery effort largely. This afternoon we're going to focus on the economic recovery of the city and work with the hotels, the restaurants, the real estate industry. We're going to we're going to rebuild. We're not only going to rebuild, we're going to come out of this stronger than we were before. And in addition to having wonderful people in New York, as the governor indicated, we also have the strongest business community of any place in the world. You know, we're going to call upon them, and we're going to need their help. But we're going to come out of this emotionally stronger, politically stronger, much closer together as a city, and we're going to come out of this economically stronger too. And we're going to start working on that right away.
What's the status of the World Financial Center? There appears to be a fire burning across the street now, fairly significant.
I believe. Do you want to answer that, Rich? I don't have the FBI.
The smoke from the World Financial Center was from a defective generator that the fire department worked on. There was no major fire at the World Financial Center.
A statement from the FBI. The FBI.
I'll make a brief statement. Obviously, as you all know, this is a pending criminal investigation. I can tell you that it is being coordinated by Director Mueller at FBI headquarters. We have essentially all 56 field offices in the country involved in this. There are primarily a dozen offices where the airplanes were hijacked and left. We're doing a lot of things as far as at those particular airports, checking on the planes, checking with crews, cleaning people. All of that is ongoing as we speak. Probably the major thrust that we are doing right now is we do have the manifest. We're reaching out to all of the families, interviewing them, and the primary purpose of that is obviously to get any information. You have had, in the media as reported, there's been a number of calls made from these various planes. We would like to put out to the people, if they haven't reported that to law enforcement, to call their local law enforcement or FBI so we can get a hold of it. The obvious thrust for us right at this particular point in time is to identify the number and the individuals who were in fact hijackers. So that is the major thrust. We will be doing a crime scene. The primary thing is, as the mayor just pointed out to you, is the black boxes. We're working with the city, but again, that's going to follow the search and rescue, ongoing intensive investigation. That's all I have at this time.
Can you say anything about the arrest in Florida and the seizure of a car in Florida and the seizure of a car?
We have a number of leads that we're running around the country. A number of these, I'm not going to get into specifics other than it's my understanding we did detain some individuals over in New Jersey. Essentially, we are finding out that is not all that relevant at this particular point in time, but I'm going to limit my comments. That is going to any of the investigative news pertaining to this investigation will come out of Washington, D.C.
Is there anyone in custody at this time? Is there anyone in custody at this time?
Other than the ones that I just mentioned to you, there are some over in New Jersey. That's the only.
Mr. Mon, can you explain to us, Mr. Mon, how airports, airlines that have been hijacked could come into the New York area without being detected by radar, without the route that they were taken being questioned by people in Transcon or radar?
I can't really answer that. That would be FAA and NTSB. I'm not going to get in. I don't know the answer to that.
Did you have any warning at all that there were hijacked planes in the air?
No, I can tell you this was a surprise. As the mayor and the governor has pointed out, it was a surprise, a shock. We had no forewarning of this happening.
Mr. Mon, there were reports that the FBI was investigating a hijacked plane just before the first plane hit the World Trade Center. Is that true?
I'm not aware of that.
Do you have any sense at this point of the range of potentially of people that were in the World Trade Centers and that are still missing or presumed dead? What is even the conceivable range that there is at this point?
The numbers that we're working on are in the thousands. Obviously, we hope that's not the case, but the estimate would be for both of the buildings that although building number 2 had a chance to clear out, a lot of people probably cleared out of building number 2. Building number 1 had some time to clear out, but there were areas of it that were affected. The best estimate that we can make, relying on the Port Authority and just everyone else that has experience with this is, that there'll be a few thousand people left in each building.
Mr. Mayor, you talked about...
And then our recovery relief efforts and our work with the medical examiner are premised on those kinds of numbers.
Mayor, can you explain, if there are thousands of bodies and there were 120 trucks of debris taken out, where are the bodies if there's only 41 confirmed fatalities? Where are the rest of them?
A lot of the debris that was taken out are structural things that were in the way of the relief effort. I don't know that the debris was actually taken out of the actual buildings that fell. But if some of you haven't been down there, but the area was very constricted by lots of structural damage and things that were in the street. So a lot of the debris that was taken away, I suspect, was the debris that blocks the entry and exit of the vehicles that have to go in and out of there. Altogether, I think so far, we account for about 45 bodies.
So are the other ones still buried in the debris?
I imagine that that's the case, yes.
Are there still sounds of life? Are the rescuers hearing with listening devices? Are they still hearing signs that there are people alive?
The rescue workers do have listening devices. They also have dogs with which they're searching. And we're making every effort to get the people out of there.
Are there indications that there are people alive, though? In other words, are they hearing things with the listening devices, or are the dogs hitting on scent?
We can't say at this time.
Is there any way to approach the area through a
Is the city
tunnel?
still on a heightened state of alert today?
Absolutely,
And
yes.
how long will it remain in effect as far as the emergency?
It's going to last until further notice.
Commissioner, could you explain to us why there are so many trucks around?
The World Trade Center, putting the towers back up as a symbol of anything right now?
There's no question we're going to rebuild. I can't say that we know the exact nature yet of how we're going to do that, and we'd like to meet with lots of people.
Any belief that the skyline will be whole again?
The skyline will be whole again. Exactly, what will be there, I think we have to leave to giving some people some time to consider it and to think about it. And also, the reality is that the people in New York City are going to be whole again. We're very, very strong.
Is there any sense of the cost at this point, and the state, the city, the federal government is paying for the relief efforts?
Governor?
In my view, that's the last thing you think about at this point. We're not concerned about who's picking up the tab. We're just doing everything we can to try to make sure the relief efforts are the strongest possible. And we'll sort out the costs and the economic consequences later.
Is there any way to try to approach through the subway tunnel to perhaps people trapped in the areas below? Is that conceivable to do? Is that I have no idea. Is that something that could be tried?
Excuse me?
Is it try to approach through a subway tunnel to get perhaps...
They're looking at every access area to that area, the rescue workers.
Has that been tried as far as you know?
No, specifically, I don't know, but I'm sure they're looking.
Last question. Mr. Mayor, could you tell us...
Police officer and where he was trapped? How he was trapped?
We now join the chaplain of the Senate as he prays along with members of Congress as they get about ready to open a session. Okay, unfortunately, as you can imagine, with the amount of stuff going on here today, we don't have that sound, but a session of Congress is about to get started. The chaplain presiding over a prayer right now. I'm Paula Zahn reporting from New York this morning. I wanted to quickly bring you up to date on what the city of New York is facing this morning. Mayor Giuliani just held a news conference along with the governor of New York, George Pataki. They say their goal right now is to rescue as many people as they can and to save lives. The good news, according to Gary Tuchman, and these numbers go back and forth, you need to understand that it is very difficult to get confirmation of this, but Gary Tuchman has gotten closer than any other reporter to the perimeter area of the World Trade Center. He has had confirmed for him by some city officials that in all 9 people have been rescued from this horrendous rubble you're looking at right now. 6 firefighters, 3 police officers, and there is hope, Leon and Darren, that 2 more people will be rescued sometime this morning. Leon Darren?
Paula, thank you very much.
Good morning, Paula.
I'm Darren Kagan at CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Leon Harris as well. Good morning, folks. You're now looking at a live picture we're getting from the House. This historic joint session of Congress about to get underway.
As they attempt to fill the gaping holes left in the fabric of this nation, send forth your Holy Spirit upon all the members of Congress, the President, and all government leaders across this nation. Free them of fear, any prejudice whatsoever. Remove all doubt and confusion from their minds. So with clear insight, which comes from you and you alone, reveal all that is unholy and renew the desire of your people to lives of deepening faith, unbounding commitment, and lasting freedom here, where liberty has made her home. We place our trust in you, now and forever. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain. The Chair has examined the Journal of the last day's proceedings and announces the House's approval thereof. Pursuant to Clause 1 of Rule 1, the Journal stands approved. The Speaker at this time will lead the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Due to the events of yesterday, the Chair wishes to announce that the joint meeting to receive the Honourable John Howard, Prime Minister of Australia, scheduled for today will not take place. The Chair wishes to acknowledge, however, the presence of the Prime Minister here today and extends on behalf of the House his appreciation for the solidarity of the Australian people and the presence of the Prime Minister today in this very difficult time. Thank you. This time, the gentleman from Texas wishes to be.
Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to address the House for 1 minute to announce today's schedule.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, as you have directed, the House is convening now. We will stay in session from now until 11 o'clock, where members will have time for 1 minute. At 11 o'clock this morning, we will take a recess until 12:30 while the chamber is cleared. Members of the body will be invited back to the chamber at 12:30, at which time we will have a member briefing on the floor that will last until 2 o'clock. At 2 o'clock, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Gephardt and I will call up by unanimous consent a joint resolution to condemn yesterday's terrorist acts. That resolution will be addressed by this body under that unanimous consent request with an understanding that we will continue to address it until each member of this chamber has had ample time to address this issue as he or she sees fit. I want to thank all the members of this body for their patience, their commitment, their understanding, and their resolve during this trying time. And let me assure you, Mr. Speaker, by the time the 435 members of this body have spoken today, the world will have no doubt about who we are, what we will stand for, and what we will not stand for. And I yield my time.
We're listening in on the House of Representatives. Over the next hour, they will each be spending 1 minute each talking about and condemning the violence that hit the United States yesterday. They will then gather at 12:30 for a briefing that will take place behind closed doors, a briefing on the investigation into the violence and the terrorist attacks on the United States. We'll go back to this. Our coverage continues with Leon.
Yeah, you know, in addition to the words that the congressmen are saying today, the symbolic message of business going on in Washington is the main message they are trying to give to the world right now. In New York, however, it is a little bit more than business as usual there. Let's go down and check in with our Martin Savage, who's there at Ground Zero. He's at the World Trade Center down there on the ground this morning. Marty?
Leon, we just finished a tour that was put together by the New York Police Department and the Fire Department that allowed members of the media to get right up to the epicenter of what is this great tragedy, not only here in New York City, but throughout the world. It is hard to imagine that the Twin Towers soared at one time 110 stories. All we could count of one of those towers was about 7 stories. It was cut off. There is a huge mass of twisted steel and concrete that really, really drives any sort of depiction as you try to explain it. It is smoldering and smoking and burning. And one of the things that strikes you as you get so close to the heart of this is how quiet it is. In part, the reason for that is the tremendous amount of ash that covers the ground as if there had been some huge volcanic eruption. It muffles everything as if you were in the middle of some giant snowstorm. Instead, though, it was something far more treacherous and far more tragic. Many of the crews and fire teams that you see there are standing around. There is only limited access. There is only very minute efforts that they can make for fear of moving in any way the huge pile and possibly forcing it to collapse more. Those that have been working on that pile say the incredible thing is how deep it goes, because of the collapsing floor and floor and floor actually drove the building deep into the basement, some believe even beyond. We also saw robots that are being brought in, small track-like devices that obviously they hope to use to sneak through any sort of crevasses or any sort of voids that may hold the opportunity for life. There was not jubilation when there were those that were rescued from the pile. Instead, it was very somber, it was very quiet, and they realized there is a lot more work to be done. Leon?
Well, Martin, have any of the officials that you've spoken with given you any sense of how realistic it is that they will find more survivors today?
Those that you talk to say that they believe there is still a chance. However, when you walk up to the building, when you see how great the devastation is, it is not only clear to a viewer's mind, but also clear to those that try to rescue. The chances are increasingly slimmer and slimmer. Still, there is hope, and the work goes on, and the two combined are what are inspiring the rescuers today. Yeah.
And Martin, how about the situation with the fire? Any idea what it is that is continuing to burn some 24, 25 hours later, and how soon they think they can get that fire out?
Well, it is hard to say because the mass is just so great. It's perhaps the fact that everything that was in the building is now smashed deep into the ground, and that there is a lot of material that is still possible to burn, and with the fire not being directly exposed to air, it's more smoldering than it is. You don't see leaping flames. You don't see open flames at all. So it appears that that's part of what's at work. Also, you have to remember there were several hundred automobiles and vehicles that were in the area that were crushed and demolished. And there, too, you have rubber tires that are burning. There was even a threat of gasoline and diesel fuel that they were worried about. So there is plenty of material that is left to burn, and it still does burn in a gray, brown smoke that rises above a drastically changed New York skyline. Yeah.
And it also means there's plenty of sad but urgent work to do as well. Martin Savage reporting live for us this morning from the World Trade Center, from what used to be the World Trade Center. Darren.
And as rescue efforts go on in New York City, rescue teams also standing by at the Pentagon, and that's where we find our Bob Franken. Bob, I understand you have some new information for us.
Well, I have several things. First of all, of course, this is a story so huge, and we talk about it in terms of institutions, when really this is the story, the human story as it is in New York, it is here too. CNN's Pentagon producer, Chris Plant, has just walked through the Pentagon, through a substantial portion of it. And he had some interesting things to report. You can see, of course, where the The plane collided with the Pentagon a little bit over a day ago. Well, now that the firefighters have spent that day trying to put out the flames, he's reporting that they have not been entirely successful, and as a matter of fact, the fire has spread a little bit. The plane hit on one of the outer rings, as you can see, but Chris Plant reports that it has now spread to the inner rings. It's gone around to my left, your right as you're watching, and you can see that the flames are going in that direction. Plant reports that there are actually some fires still in the roof area, and that the area around the inner ring has some spot fires, that type of thing going on. That, by the way, has been confirmed by some of the firefighters who have been out here. We are also told that the entire Pentagon, all floors of it, seem to be at least covered in soot, and there's a smoke on the walls throughout all of the floors of the Pentagon. As a matter of fact, even the areas that were not directly affected, like the secretaries' areas, have been in effect abandoned. The secretaries, the leaders of the Pentagon, have gone down in the basement where they're operating right now, and of course trying to keep the military operation going. As far as the search for the casualties here, it's very dangerous right now. We're told by the people who are in charge of that it is so unstable they can't decide whether to try and knock down the wall where the plane hit or restabilize it somehow. These are the decisions that are being made. It's very, very risky now. When they do go in, it's very dark. They worry about tripping and they worry about a collapse. So this is a story of individual courage. As huge as it is, it's a number of individuals trying to see just how successful they can be, finding somebody who survived, although one fire official told me highly unlikely, but he said we're not going to give up. That would be despair. Leon?
Actually, it's Darren, Bob. You mentioned the talk with the firefighter, but is there any indication that people might still be alive inside the Pentagon?
They have found nobody yet. They have found that there are some bodies. They have not been recovered. There are really a wide variation in the number of casualties we'll have. The best guess is it might be 100 or less, but the estimates have gone much higher than that. Thus far, no sign of survivors, particularly in the area where the plane hit. None are expected to be found, but there, in fact, have been some casualties spotted, not removed, but spotted.
Bob Franken at the Pentagon. We'll be checking back with you throughout the morning. Right now, back up to New York City and Paula.
Thanks so much, Darren. I just wanted to quickly recap for you what we know at this hour. As we've been reporting all morning long, all the public schools are closed, the private schools, the parochial schools are closed. But the Securities and Exchange Commission has now told CNN that the SEC chairman believes that the financial markets will indeed open for trading on tomorrow. However, an official decision has not been made at this moment. Right now I want to go to Gary Tuchman, who is as close as you can get to what is left of the World Trade Center for an update on rescue operations underway. Gary, what do you got?
Well, yesterday morning at this time, the tallest buildings in New York City, the second tallest buildings in the United States, stood in the street just a couple of blocks behind me. And now the skyline here on this street, Church Street, looks like it did back in 1971 before the World Trade Centers were built. That beige building was there in the early 70s and the late 60s and the 50s, and that's what it looked like if you were here in New York City before that. It's a very strange sight indeed, not seeing those gleaming 110-story building behind me. We just saw a very disturbing sight on this area where we're standing. These are all emergency workers here right now, police. We have members of the military who are here. We have other emergency officials. And just a couple of minutes ago, you're going to look right now. This is one of the disturbing sights. There you see a car that was incinerated in the parking lot of the World Trade Center. It's very hard to look at those sites and imagine what happened to the people who were nearby. We've seen a lot of cars like that today. This truck right here that just passed by has wreckage from the World Trade Center, but an even more disturbing sight about 5 minutes ago, we saw a vehicle from the medical examiner's office carrying body bags. We can tell you we haven't had any good news whatsoever in the last couple of hours about survivors, but there have been 9 survivors found. And with us right now are 2 of the gentlemen who worked with one of the survivors. Gentlemen, can you come over here for a second? This is Brian Van Flander. This is Steve Martinez. They're emergency medical technicians. I want to ask you, Brian, you told me that you loaded up onto an ambulance a police officer who survived this terrible tragedy. Tell me about that.
Yeah, I was going to say, as a transit authority officer, we worked on them for, when I say we, I mean the EMS, the firefighters. Those guys were just incredible down there. They worked on him for a better part of 4 to 5 hours. He was only extricated maybe an hour and a half ago. And the reason it took so long was because they were trying to save his foot. They were very worried that they were going to have
amputate his foot while he was still in the wreckage?
Yes. We actually, as I understand it, and I didn't actually get the chance to see him in the wreckage.
You put him in the ambulance.
That's right. I loaded him in, helped many guys load him in. They crawled down into, he was in a pit, and they had to crawl down next to him or beneath him and physically cut a cable that had punctured his ankle, as I understand it.
Was he talking to you as you put him in the ambulance?
He was lucid. He was aware. He wasn't. He was talking, but not. Kind of thumbs up. There was a nice big round of applause as we got him on the stretcher, and then again when we got him into the ambulance, and people were. It was actually a very tearful moment, a very touching moment. Kind of shows the best of New Yorkers. These guys are just working their hearts out. They're trying to save their fellow colleagues. So.
Also touching what you have in this box. Show me what you have in it.
Yeah, well, we found this at Ground Zero. There's 3 command stations. We're at Liberty 1, which is about as close as you can get to Ground Zero without being in a pit. And we found Herb just lying outside amongst the rubble. The carnage, I know you guys hear everyone coming out of here saying the carnage is unbelievable, but it's just beyond comprehension. You cannot possibly imagine the devastation down there. And this kind of tells the story unto itself.
Tell me what you're going to be doing with this.
Well, I'd like to clean it up and give it to a young girl in memory of the people who died, and maybe when she's old enough she can appreciate.
Hard for you.
Yeah, a lot hard.
How are you coping right now, sir?
I'm all right. I'm fine. It was rough in there, We went in. Basically, we provided EMS services for the fire department and the rescuers, the people who were digging. They were having a hard time breathing, having a hard time seeing with their eyes.
You can see that the rescuers have their masks that they wear.
Yeah.
Anyone in this area is supposed to be wearing these masks.
Yeah,
so
there's a lot of crap floating around in the air, and it's rough in there. We had firefighters pass out on us. We had to give them oxygen, things like that.
Are you scared?
Yeah, it was scary a few times in there with the fire and all that. Then there was one point where they thought they had found somebody, so they called EMS in, and we ran in. And that's when we really got a really good look at it, because from the outside, it's a lot of hilly rubble, and you don't get to really see it unless you're in there digging. And when they called EMS in, we ran in and actually really got to finally see what it looked like, and it was just chaos. It was chaos, and also it wasn't nothing but a couple of DOAs down there that they took out.
Dead on arrival. Gentlemen, a country thanks you for your service.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it. We have one more gentleman over here. If you can come over with us, sir. This is a member of the Guardian Angels, the crime prevention group, who was crawling through the wreckage for many hours. Can I get your name, sir?
Bill Coscarelli.
Bill, tell me what your experiences were at the site just a couple of blocks behind us.
Well, like he was saying before, my mayor thing was yesterday night. I started, when the fire went down a little bit, I started to get into the buildings, over the basements, over the fire station, looking for people. I have a hard time finding people that want to come with me. Finally,
would-be rescuers who wanted to come.
Yeah, rescuers or firefighters. The firefighters that were mainly on top of the building, and basically nobody wanted to leave the top of the building. I went out there. I went to the path train. Basically, I went to the station.
Which is the commuter train in the bottom level of the building.
Yeah, exactly. I went all the way down to the station looking for people.
What did you see, sir?
Everything is. It's no roof. It's basically. It's nothing left from the building. It's a 60-feet hole where the building collapsed, and everything is there.
Sir, I want to thank you for joining us and talking with us. Appreciate your help. You can see it's an extremely stressful, very troubling situation. They are hoping to find more survivors, but right now, officially, we know a total of 9 survivors have been found. Paula, back to you.
All right, well, it is absolutely chilling to hear these first accounts of what it is like for rescue areas to go into Ground Zero. As you may remember from last night, rescue workers weren't even allowed into the area till very late because of concerns about debris continuing to fall, the fumes that continue to come from the crash site. We will, I am sure, continue to hear more of these horrifying accounts of what it is like for the rescue workers that are going in there. We do need to make it clear there has been some positive news this morning. Some of those very brave rescue workers have, in fact, according to Gary Tuckman, rescued some 9 folks trapped inside the rubble, 6 city firefighters and 3 police officers, and the hope is that 2 more victims trapped inside the rubble will be rescued. One of those victims actually establishing cell phone contact with a family member. It is hard to imagine, by looking at these pictures, that anyone ever could have survived the strength and the force of this kind of attack. But the mayor of New York, Rudy Giuliani, expressing the hope that there might be more people trapped inside the rubble. We know from FEMA Director Joe Alba that 8 specially trained crews, urban rescue crews, will be on the site at some point later today to assist all the paramedics and the rescue workers on the scene right now. The mayor unable to give us any sense of what kind of fatalities we're looking at. All he will say is that the numbers will be very, very high. One city official telling me those numbers could climb into the thousands. I wanted to remind everybody that the President Bush is in the process of meeting with his cabinet secretaries, and we are hoping that sometime within the next 45 minutes or so, at what is expected to be the conclusion of these meetings, that we'll have a little more information for you on that. So from New York, let's go back to Leon in Atlanta.
All right, thank you very much, Paula. You know, so many of us had thought for so long that the Twin Towers were invincible. We had heard for so many times over the years that the buildings had been built to withstand an impact from a crash of a plane. Well, let's talk right now on the telephone with Aaron Swirsky. He is in Jerusalem, and he was one of the original architects of the complex. As I understand it, is that the case, Mr. Swirsky?
Yes, I was working with Minoru Yamasaki, which is the architect of the building, but I was one of the workers with him. We were a team of 14, 15 architects, and I was one of the members of the team. Yes.
Well, as a member of the team and having such insight into how this building was constructed, could you believe that a plane could bring these buildings down?
No, as a matter of fact, one of the rationales of the structure of the building was that it would be built as a pipe, and that proved itself to be a worthwhile thing in the explosion of 1993, when a hole was brought into the building. It survived, but somehow nobody could foresee anything like that. At that time, also in 1962. The planes were not like this type of planes that we have now. They were, I think, the biggest plane was a 100-passenger plane, something like that, and the fuel capacity of those planes were not like it's today. And the criteria was that if a plane hits it, it would go right through it. And I mean, so nobody could foresee something like that, and that the tower was protected in such a way that the damage would be limited to one story, but it wouldn't travel to the other stories.
Well, then let me ask you this then. Can you draw in your mind any distinction between the two factors here? Which made the bigger difference, the size of the plane here or the amount of fuel that the planes were carrying?
Excuse me, I lost the connection.
Sure, I understand. You're saying that the planes that were in design or that were in use at the time these buildings were designed were smaller planes. They only carried 100 passengers or so. The planes that crashed yesterday were much bigger than that. They were 767s or 757s.
And also the fuel capacity, it's much more tremendous. I mean,
exactly, and that's what I want to ask you about. Which was it that made the biggest difference? Was it the impact felt from the larger plane, or was it the heat that was generated by the burning of that much fuel?
Well, I imagine, when I saw the pictures of the implosion of the buildings, it looks like the fuel must have leaked right through the core of the building, and from there, the massive explosion is what caused the building to collapse. So it was something completely unforeseen as far as the design criteria was.
Let me ask you one final question, if I may. Considering what you know about the building, you say it was constructed like a pipe, these two buildings, and the manner in which we saw them collapse, does that give you any hope at all that perhaps the way it collapsed, there will be more pockets inside at the bottom where survivors could be found?
Well, I sure hope so. We pray that there will be survivors and that this won't happen again. And I mean, it's a terrible, terrible, incredible tragedy. Yeah.
Aaron Swirsky, we thank you very much for your insight this morning.
Yep. Thank you very much.
Take care. Darren.
Leon, yesterday's events hasn't just shocked people here in the U.S., people all around the world. And when something like this happens to a member of NATO, the entire organization takes action. NATO has just wrapped up a meeting in Brussels, and our Andrea Koppel's at the State Department in Washington, D.C. with more on what NATO members had to say about yesterday's events. Andrea.
Darren, far away from the scenes of carnage in this country, in a very different setting in Brussels, we're told by both diplomatic and State Department sources that the member states of NATO are right now sitting in a room going over a draft document, that this is the first time in NATO's history that they would do this, that would give the United States an upfront guarantee that if and when they're able to figure out who in fact was behind yesterday's attacks, that NATO, all 19 states, would guarantee the United States any kind of military support it needed, whether it be logistical, intelligence, the right to fly through their airspace. All of this would be taken care of and would be in the waiting. It would be at the ready for the United States if it chose to ask NATO for its support, that NATO would in fact then give the U.S. that support. And this is being discussed right now at NATO headquarters, the first time it's being done under something known as Chapter 5 of the NATO Charter, and it's something that Secretary Powell, in fact, alluded to this morning when he said that he spoke with the head of NATO, Lord Robertson. He also spoke with the head of the United Nations, Kofi Annan, and with the head of the EU, Javier Solana. So right now, Darren, the United States, with the help of its European allies, member states of NATO, are laying the groundwork for a possible military retaliation if and when the U.S. is able to determine who is behind yesterday's attacks. Darren?
Andrea, this would be hugely significant. Basically, as I understand it, it would be NATO saying to the U.S., if and when you decide to retaliate, we're giving you a green light and the support to do whatever you feel is necessary.
Absolutely. This would be the first time in NATO's more than 50-year history that anything like this has taken place. Remember that during the crisis in Kosovo and the Balkan War most recently, this took place off NATO soil. These were not member states of NATO. This is the first time in NATO's history that one of its 19 members has been attacked directly on its own soil, and for that reason, we're told the United States is getting the backing of NATO, and they're discussing this draft document right now that would lay the groundwork up front for the United States to use all of NATO's various military intelligence and whatnot, all of its resources to attack, if that decision is made, those responsible. But again, they need to make sure, first of all, that this was not something that was homegrown here in the United States, but in fact something that happened or was directed from overseas. And that's certainly what we've been hearing both President Bush and Secretary Powell allude to, that their intelligence is leading them to various places overseas.
And once again, this would still be at the discussion stage, Andrea?
Well, right now we're told there is a draft document that is on the table right now in Brussels that all 19 members are discussing, and it's our understanding from both State Department and diplomatic sources that this is something that could very well be approved in the very, very near future in a matter of hours.
All right, we will have you track that. Andrea Koppel at the State Department. And now back up to New York and Paula.
Darren, I'm actually going to focus my attention on a development out of Boston this morning. The Boston Globe is reporting that investigators in Boston have found a copy of the Koran, a videotape on how to fly commercial jets, and a fuel consumption calculator in a pair of bags that was apparently meant for American flight Flight 11, which of course crashed in the World Trade Center yesterday. The Boston Globe said that the suitcases belonged to a man with an Arabic name who investigators believe was one of those who hijacked the plane and crashed it into the World Trade Center. Right now, I want to check in with Bill Delaney to provide some perspective for us this morning on this story. First of all, is the Boston Globe the only one going with this story?
Well, actually, it's the Boston Herald, in fact, Paula, that's been leading the way on this story as hundreds of federal, state, and local investigators fan out to try to determine who hijacked these planes. It was the Boston Herald, their entire staff of dozens of people thrown into this yesterday, who broke a lot of this important news this morning in their overnight edition. I have with me one of the reporters on that staff, John Wells. John, what did the Herald learn about the hijackers involved in these two planes that eventually crashed into the World Trade Center?
Well, what we learned rather late last night is that authorities have identified 5 suspects of Arab men as possibly involved with this, that 2 of them may be brothers. Another 2 of them apparently traveled into Boston from Portland, Maine, originating, authorities think, in Canada. And that they also seized an automobile at Logan Airport out of the central parking garage, a Mitsubishi sedan. And apparently within the sedan were pilot training manuals, or a manual that was in Arabic. This is what we're told by reliable law enforcement sources here in Boston, which it speaks to there's some roots to this in Boston, which not many people are aware of, but it speaks to the idea that there may be a terrorist cell in Boston.
It was in the late 90s, the FBI said earlier this year, that there was a small, possibly just 2 men linked to Osama bin Laden here in Boston. What can you tell us about that?
Well, yeah, there are 2 men. They're both cab drivers who have been, have alleged ties to bin Laden, who lived here in the 90s. One of them has since been killed in Lebanon. The other one has a death sentence over his head in Jordan, I believe. And they were linked around the time of the millennium. They were gone by then, apparently, from Boston, but they were linked to some plotting around the millennium for terrorist bombs in the U.S.
A security source I spoke to this morning, I must say, because we do have to be cautious about these reports, somewhat scoffed at the idea that someone who was heading to a hijacking, who was going to fly that plane, would bring with him a manual about how to fly an airplane. What do you make of that?
Understandable that he would have that reaction. This is raw information that we're getting from reliable law enforcement sources. We're not in the business of selecting out things that seem unlikely. He may be right. I don't know. We're going with the best information we have right now, and things are changing quickly.
Why Boston?
Well, there's a lot of speculation about that. Geographic location, close to New York, close to Canada. If this is true, that there is some cell that's linked to a cell in Canada, a cell here in Boston, that's logical because travel is easy from across the border. I think that there's been talk also about that Logan has a spotty security record. So there's been speculation that terrorists would think this is a good place to stage something like this, although there's been no information regarding that.
The FAA in the late 90s finding some 136 security violations here, fining the airport $178,000, a spotty record at Logan.
Yeah, and I'm hearing today also that Logan workers are coming out and on the radio talk shows and talking about how horrific they feel the security is there, and that they've known it for years. And one of them said today that he comes to work at Logan Airport at 5 a.m. He could drive a tank in here. This is how some of those workers feel. So there's clearly a problem that needs to be addressed. Obviously, a little bit late.
John Wells of the Boston Herald, thank you very much. This still unfolding story, as I said, hundreds of investigators fanning out to try to determine how hijackers hijacked the planes that crashed into the World Trade Center yesterday that originated tragically in Boston. Back to you.
Bill, it's interesting now that you have both the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald essentially reporting the same thing. I also found it interesting that the head of the Massachusetts, or the aviation director of the Massachusetts Port Authority is saying that when Logan reopens, that, quote, there will be very significant security changes, including no more curbside luggage check-in and a ban on anyone except registered passengers passing checkpoints. That sounds to me that the spotty record that you were talking about was, well known and well established.
It's been a problem here for years, I have to tell you. They also have had their security successes here, but there have been notorious cases. For example, 2 summers ago, a teenager managed to get over the fence surrounding Logan Airport. He was dressed as an Hasidic Jew. He got over a fence with razor wire on top of it. He went to a 747, got into it, and made his way all the way to London, a notorious case here 2 summers ago. So yes, Logan has had problems over the years. On the other hand, even the FAA report from about 2 years ago, which blasted Logan, said that for a major airport, the violations here were really no more serious than they found at many other major airports. Logan Airport has problems, so does virtually every major airport in the United States. So we shouldn't brand them completely, but yes, it's conceivable that if there was a cell here that was spending time in Boston, examining the place, laying the groundwork for all this, that one of the incentives for being here in the first place was an airport that any of us who travel through it regularly will tell you has its weak points, has its checkpoints that it seems rather effortless to get through. Frankly, we've often commented on it ourselves as we fly in and out of Logan Airport.
But Bill, I got to tell you, that doesn't give flyers out there a great deal of confidence if you're saying that no one wants to brand Logan as particularly much worse than the other airports. The fact remains that hijackers were also able to hijack planes out of Newark and out of Dulles yesterday. And I know from talking to folks on the street earlier this morning, there's a sense of outrage that this could happen, that 4 hijackings could take place in a couple-hour period. Are you getting, I know that John Wells was saying that he's talked to workers at the airport who say that they aren't surprised this happened, but what kind of buzz are you getting from Boston residents about this?
It's the buzz that you hear all over the country, and it's the simple question, how could this have happened? But added to that question, I will have to tell you, and I have spoken to a lot of people in this town in the last 24 hours, Logan is something that comes up here. People go in and out of this very busy airport. There are some 28 million passengers a year in and out of Logan, and many of them have stories to tell of problems here. A colleague of mine, for example, once was in a ladies' room at Logan Airport, found a knapsack, reported it to security officials. Security officials said, yeah, maybe we should look at that, but why don't you call this number and see what you can do about it. They didn't go and even examine this knapsack that was left. And as anyone who's traveled through European airports or Middle Eastern airports knows, they're extremely careful about bags left unattended. So there's a history, an anecdotal history at least, of those sort of problems here. And again, I want to stress, the Federal Aviation Administration, in its examination of Logan back in the late 90s, blasted the airport, but said in the same report, this major airport is no worse than any other major airport in the United States. A paradoxical and disturbing conclusion about how safe it is to get on an airplane in the United States.
Bill, before I let you go, you cautioned us not to come to any conclusions about these 5 suspects who the Boston Herald is reporting have apparently been identified. The reporter you just interviewed described them as Arab men, possibly brothers who might in some way been involved in the planning stages of this attack. Once again, let's make this very clear to our audience. No one obviously can definitively link these 5 men in any way to Osama bin Laden or definitively link them to whoever launched this attack.
No, these are strands at this point, let's be very clear about it, that are being pulled together. On the other hand, law enforcement officials will tell you here that it has all the earmarks of the sort of thing we're talking about. Law enforcement officials here will say quite definitively that they believe that there was some kind of a cell obviously set up here for a period of time, because how else could this have happened in the first place? Let's not forget, 1, 2, but probably more like 8 or 9 individuals hijacked 2 airplanes here yesterday. 2 airplanes from 2 different airlines. 2 different airlines in 2 separate terminals. It happened within 15 minutes of each other. Both these planes left within 15 minutes of each other. So in the space of 45 minutes or so in boarding this plane in 2 separate terminals, they were able to do this simultaneously. So none of this is definitive yet. This is very early on. But as I say, law enforcement officials say you put 2 and 2 together. It's not completely unreasonable, along with the kind of splendid reporting by the staff at the Boston Herald and other newspaper sources here, and sources of our own security sources who all agree it has all the earmarks of the sort of thing that someone like Osama bin Laden could have been behind. Let me add, however, I did speak to a security source this morning who said she felt that people were getting a little too carried away with Osama bin Laden. She scoffed, as I mentioned in my conversation with John Wells, at the thought that there would be, all too conveniently, she felt, a training manual in Arabic in a car.
Sure.
Why would a pilot bring a training manual in Arabic that allegedly told him how to fly a commercial airline? It sounded fanciful to her, and she did say that she felt people were getting a little bit carried away. But I will add, on the other hand, law enforcement officials say you put 2 and 2 together, and it does seem to add up to 4, as far as a cell having been organized here in Boston, laying the groundwork for what seems to have all the earmarks of the sort of thing someone like Osama bin Laden could have put together.
Well, I appreciate your clarifying that for us, Bill, because what you've just reported is extremely disturbing, and I can imagine, based on what you're reporting and what the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald is reporting, you are going to be, I think, in the crossfire of where most of the major new developments are coming from. We really appreciate your insights. Thank you. And now we're going to go back to Leon in Atlanta.
Yeah, Paul, I mean, as you know, throughout the morning, we've been checking reaction from around the world. We want to show you this picture that we're getting in right now from London. You're looking now at the Prime Minister's residence there in London, number 10 Downing Street, the residence of Tony Blair. And as you can see there, the British flag there is flying at half-staff, a symbol that, once again, that country is walking shoulder to shoulder with the U.S. and sharing their grief and offering their condolences at this time. We're also seeing a similar scene at the U.S. Capitol. You see there on the top of the Capitol building there, all the flags there as well, flying this morning, half-staff, while that joint session is underway right now in Congress. Let's stay in Washington while we have that picture up and check in with our Kelly Wallace, who is standing by at the White House, where, as we understand, President Bush is involved in some meetings right now with his cabinet and security officials. Kelly.
Absolutely, Leon. The president meeting with his national security team. That includes Secretary of State Colin Powell, his national security advisor, Dr. Condoleezza Rice, Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld, CIA Director George Tenet, as well as others. That meeting began at 9:30. It's expected to end just moments from now, at which point we will hear from President Bush. It will be the first time we are hearing from him since last night when he went before the nation. This to be the president's getting his up-to-date briefing on the latest on the investigation, as well as the search and rescue efforts. 2 goals really for the administration, Leon, today. One, to show that the U.S. government is doing everything it can to help with recovery efforts in New York, in Pennsylvania, and at the Pentagon, and that investigative teams are deployed to places like Boston and San Francisco and L.A., again, to do everything possible to find those responsible. Ari Fleischer, White House press secretary, talking to reporters a short time ago, not commenting, as U.S. officials have not been doing so far publicly, about this investigation, just saying that the full resources of the U.S. government involved here. We did get, though, Leon, a little bit more about the president's involvement. He was in the Oval Office at 7:05 this morning, and he reached out to a couple of world leaders, calling Canadian Prime Minister Jean Chrétien and British Prime Minister Tony Blair. Ari Fleischer saying those leaders expressed the resolve to stand united against terrorism. And interestingly, I think we're just about to hear from President Bush now, Leon. So let's go to that if that is about underway. Oh, okay. Sorry, misinformation. Anyway, Leon, back to you. I know the president also calling yesterday his father, former President George W. Bush, aboard Air Force One, an interesting conversation, and also reaching out to Solicitor General Ted Olson, who, as we've reported, lost his wife in one of those crashes yesterday. Leon, back to you.
Terrible situation there, and we understand that his wife was able to make a cell phone call from that plane as well. Thanks, Kelly. We'll get back to you once we do hear word from Mr. Bush. Darren, over to you now.
Meanwhile, a lot of people wanting information about how this investigation would take place, how government authorities will get to the bottom of who carried out these attacks. Let's bring in James Woolsey, former CIA director from 93 to 95, also former ambassador. Mr. Ambassador, good morning, and thanks for joining us here.
Good morning. Good to be with you.
Any clues you're hearing as more information becomes available that is giving you an indication as to who might be responsible for these attacks?
Well, of course, there's a lot of information that points toward bin Laden's group, and that's understandable. Bin Laden has been advertising himself now for some time, issuing fatwas, religious declaratives, condemnations, making videotapes, quoting poems, having his subordinates all talk about how they're going to be carrying out major terrorist operations against the U.S. So it may well be the case that bin Laden's group was instrumental in this and, in fact, carried it out. But one wants to be careful using the word behind it, because there is at least some possibility that someone else was behind it. This was a very complex operation, and the possibility that there was a state sponsor behind or working with bin Laden, such as possibly Iraq, I think has to be investigated. There's a book out late last year by Laurie Milroy called Saddam's Study of Revenge about the possibility that Saddam was behind the 1973 World Trade Center bombing, and that Ramzi Yousef, who was the mastermind of that, was involved with Iraqi intelligence. That information has been poo-pooed to some extent by the Clinton administration.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm going to have you hold on 1 second. We want to go live now to the White House. President Bush speaking with members of the cabinet. Let's listen in.
Intelligence updates. The deliberate and deadly attacks which were carried out yesterday against our country were more than acts of terror. They were acts of war. This will require our country to unite in steadfast determination and resolve. Freedom and democracy are under attack. The American people need to know we're facing a different enemy than we have ever faced. This enemy hides in shadows and has no regard for human life. This is an enemy who preys on innocent and unsuspecting people, then runs for cover. But it won't be able to run for cover forever. This is an enemy that tries to hide, but it won't be able to hide forever. This is an enemy that thinks its harbors are safe, but they won't be safe forever. This enemy attacked not just our people, but all freedom-loving people everywhere in the world. The United States of America will use all our resources to conquer this enemy. We will rally the world. We will be patient, we'll be focused, and we will be steadfast in our determination. This battle will take time and resolve. But make no mistake about it, we will win. The federal government and all our agencies are conducting business, but it is not business as usual. We are operating on heightened security alert. America is going forward, and as we do so, we must remain keenly aware of the threats to our country. Those in authority should take appropriate precautions to protect our citizens. But we will not allow this enemy to win the war by changing our way of life or restricting our freedoms. This morning I am sending to Congress a request for emergency funding authority so that we are prepared to spend whatever it takes to rescue victims, to help the citizens of New York City and Washington, D.C. respond to this tragedy, and to protect our national security. I want to thank the members of Congress for their unity and support. America's united. The freedom-loving nations of the world stand by our side. This will be a monumental struggle of good versus evil, but good will prevail. Thank you very much.
Seeking a formal declaration.
Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Flags,
Flags, please. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Flags, please.
Thanks.
It doesn't appear as if President Bush is going to take any questions from reporters in the room. He is meeting at the White House with members of the cabinet. We just listened to him live, the first time the country's heard him speak since he addressed the nation last night. The president saying that the events of yesterday were more than terrorism. It was an act of war, an attack on freedom and democracy. Also saying that America now faces a different enemy than ever before. Let's bring back in former CIA Director James Woolsey. Mr. Ambassador, I understand you were listening right along with us to the president.
Yes.
When the president says this is a different enemy than ever before, what does he mean by that?
Well, he's talking about terrorists, and particularly, I think, a group like bin Laden's, and I thought the president's address was eloquent and stirring even, but he used a word, harbor, which he used last night. A harbor for terrorists might be, say, the Taliban regime in Afghanistan, but there may be more involved than harbors here. There may be a government other than a harbor, such as the Iraqi government, that is orchestrating this to some extent, funding it, working closely on it behind bin Laden or some other terrorist group. And I very much hope that the Bush administration, unlike the Clinton administration, will not set aside this possibility and assume that everything is just a terrorist group, even a terrorist group as major as bin Laden's. It really needs to look carefully at the possibility that there may be state sponsorship here, and I think the most likely, certainly not the only possibility, is Iraq.
So to look outside the box, in other words, the terrorists might be geographically in one place, but the funding might be coming from someplace very different.
Possible funding, possible direction, possible support in the form of intelligence organization assistance to the terrorists. There are all sorts of possibilities. This was the original theory of the chief FBI investigator, Mr. Fox, of the World Trade Center bombing in 1993. But the government prosecutors turned away from it a couple of years later, and the Clinton administration turned away from it, turned toward the theory that this was all just loose associations of terrorists, and then later bin Laden. I hope the Bush administration will go back and take a fresh look and consider at least the possibility that there could be some state sponsor involvement here.
James Woolsey, Mr. Ambassador, former CIA Director. Sir, thanks for your time this morning, and thanks for your insight as well.
Thank you.
Leon.
Well, the investigations into what happened here and who's responsible are well underway, and we understand that we're just being told now that the FBI is going to be having two different press conferences, one at Boston Logan Airport and another one at Shakespeare, Pennsylvania, which is the site of that one plane crash, excuse me, just south of Pittsburgh. And once those do get underway, we'll check them out. But in the meantime, let's go now to our Washington Bureau, where Kelly Arena, our justice correspondent, is standing by. Kelly?
Well, Leon, there are many threads that are being pulled together here to try to get at exactly who did this. And I'll start with the fact that intelligence sources tell CNN that at least 2 phone calls were intercepted by the United States after the bombing. Now, they believe that the conversations were between members of the group, the Al-Qaeda organization, which is backed by Osama bin Laden. During those conversations, there was talk of hitting 2 U.S. targets. This is one of the pieces of evidence that points to Osama bin Laden, points to, doesn't prove anything, but that is part of the investigation. The second thing is that we did hear from the Justice Department earlier that it is a good guess that there were between 3 and 5 hijackers on each of the planes, and at least one of the hijackers must have been trained professionally to fly commercial aircraft. We do know that law enforcement sources tell us that part of the investigation involves looking into checking the flight manifest, the passenger lists, and cross-checking those with names that have attended flight school to see if there's any correlation between the two. They're also looking at facilities that offer simulation training, flight simulation training, to see if there's anything that matches there, because they say that to fly state-of-the-art equipment like we have on our commercial aircraft, you had to be trained either in the United States or in Europe, and so they are busy doing that. We do know that the investigation we heard earlier has intensified in two areas. In Boston, where there was a car that was impounded by law enforcement with, we are told, suspicious materials, but also in southern Florida, where law enforcement sources confirmed that there were several search warrants that were attempted to be delivered this morning. There was some information on flight manifests as well that pointed to possible links with Osama bin Laden sympathizers in South Florida, but unfortunately none of those search warrants were able to yield anything. I was told the quote is, it's pure vanilla so far, meaning there's no solid investigative leads, but investigations are intense in both Boston and South Florida, Leon.
All right, great. Thanks much. Kelly Arena in Washington. Now, let's go up to New York. Paula.
All right, thanks so much. I don't have a whole lot to report here right now, Leon, except to say that there is still some hope that two men trapped in the rubble of the World Trade Center are expected to be rescued. If you add that to the 9 that have already been rescued, that including 6 firefighters and 3 police officers, your total would come to 11. Now, the mayor of this city held a news conference a short while ago, where he expressed his goal to try to get as much rubble out of the area, and of course the first priority to see if there are any more victims trapped alive in this rubble. Now, the city is still at somewhat of a standstill today. The major stock markets are closed, public schools, private schools are closed. All businesses south of 14th Street, which is 20 or blocks away from here, are closed. Several inbound bridges and tunnels remain closed at this hour. You look at these pictures of the rubble, and it's stunning to think that paramedics and the special urban rescue teams that have been brought in will have success at rescuing even more people, but that is the expectation. Right now, I want to check in with Christiane Amanpour for the latest reaction from Britain. And before I get to that, Christiane, I wanted your reaction to part of an interview I did with King Abdullah earlier today, where I asked him a series of questions as to what role he thinks U.S. policy in the Middle East might have played in the U.S.'s vulnerability to the attack. And at one point in the interview, he said if peace had been achieved in July, or an accord had been reached in July of 2000, this might not have happened. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, Paula, clearly anti-American feelings in the Middle East have been on the rise since the Intifada, which started in Israel and the territories 11 months ago. This is clear. Moderate Arab countries have warned the United States that this was happening and that it has been happening, and Arab leaders have seen their people take to the streets over the months of the Intifada, demanding that something be done on behalf of the Palestinians. And also, you've had guests on your programs this morning, notably Dennis Ross, the former Middle East peace envoy and chief negotiator, who confirmed that anti-Americanism has been on the rise, and those kinds of sentiments are more pronounced now than they have been perhaps ever. On the other hand, the same people, Dennis Ross and other experts on these matters, say that it is not necessarily about there not being a peace agreement. They point out that in 1993, when the first attack was conducted on the World Trade Center building, that was at the height of the peace process, when it had just started, really, the Oslo process, and the governments of the Middle East, the United States, were all fully engaged, including the Palestinians, in trying to come to a peace agreement. Many people believe that despite the anti-Americanism that is palpable now on the streets of the Middle East, that it is not about having no peace agreement, that the terrorists who planned and meticulously carried out this catastrophe, they believe would have done it peace agreement or no peace agreement, because they are against the peace agreement in any event. They have spoken out clearly against the Oslo process, Paula.
Christiane, if you would Come back to you for more British reaction to the massacre that was unleashed yesterday. Right now I want to go to the floor of the Senate where the junior senator from New York is addressing her colleagues.
Chuck has and all of our colleagues in the House by the strong support we've received from the President, and I am very grateful. We've expressed our appreciation. Chuck and I will be going to New York this afternoon with FEMA. And we could not ask for more than we've received in the immediate aftermath of this horrific attack. But we are by no means anywhere near the end of what it will take. To continue the search and rescue efforts, we are finding people even as we speak. Yet we know that there is a very grim task ahead to do everything we can to find every person, to account for every single person who went to work. That's all they did. They went to work on a beautiful September day in New York. We will also stand united behind our President as he and his advisors plan the necessary actions to demonstrate America's resolve and commitment, not only to seek out and exact punishment on the perpetrators, but to make very clear that not only those who harbor terrorists, but those who in any way, any aid or comfort whatsoever will now face the wrath of our country. And I hope that message has gotten through to everywhere it needs to be heard, that you are either with America in our time of need or you are not. We also stand united behind our resolve, as this resolution so clearly states, to recover and rebuild in the aftermath of these tragic acts. You know, New York was not an accidental choice for these madmen, these terrorists, these instruments of evil. They deliberately chose to strike at a city which is a global city. It is the city of the 21st century. It epitomizes who we are as Americans. And so this, in a very real sense, was an attack on America, on our values, on our power, on who we are as a people. And I know, because I know America, that America will stand behind New York, that America will offer whatever resources, aid, comfort, support that New Yorkers and New York require. Because the greatest rebuke we can offer to those who attack our way of life is to demonstrate clearly we are not cowed in any way whatsoever. I hope that within a short period of time, Senator Warner, we see scaffolding on the sides of the Pentagon. After we finish the search and rescue and recovery work that is being carried out heroically there, I hope we all see a clear signal that we are rebuilding, that our defenses are more resolute than ever. And I hope, similarly, that Lower Manhattan has the same kind of image to project, because the reality will be that we are rebuilding and reconstructing and making clear that just as our military might is unchallenged and uncowed, so is our economic, our social, our political values epitomized by New York.
All right, there you see at the Junior Center from New York, Hillary Clinton pointedly talking about what needs to be done to confront these terrorists that launched these multiple attacks against the U.S. yesterday. making reference to the indomitable spirit of New Yorkers and the collective strength to rebuild. Not making a reference to what President Bush just made an announcement of, which is requesting immediate funding from Congress to deal with the rescue efforts and the cleaning up of the debris. So that is the very latest from here. Darren, I want to go back to you and just make one more quick note about what rescue workers are telling us. Once again, they have every reason to believe that 2 people trapped in the rubble will be rescued, that they will be found alive, and if that is true, that would bring the total to 11 of all of the victims who have been successfully brought out of these horrendous ruins.
And Paula, as those efforts go on in New York City, I'm sure thoughts and prayers from across the country and around the world going to those rescue workers trying to save more lives. Another development in this story, earlier this morning, CNN received word that there were possibly planes in Canadian airspace. And of course, this would go against the shutdown of airspace across the U.S. and Canada. Let's bring our David Ensor in. He's in our Washington, D.C. bureau. David, do you have any more information on these planes? Were they flying? And perhaps did they have permission to do so?
Well, we understand from Canadian sources that the planes are compassion flights, but we have not been able to get confirmation of that from U.S. officials. We should have it soon. The feeling is that these planes are probably no threat to anyone, but that has not been finally nailed down yet, Darren. What is happening in the U.S. intelligence community and over in law enforcement is, of course, a tremendous amount of work. They are being flooded with all sorts of data, intelligence gathered, but also received and unsolicited. Countless emails and faxes are being sent to agencies from the White House to the CIA, claiming credit for the attacks, if credit is the right word, threatening future attacks. Much of this information, officials I've spoken to say, looks pretty wacky, but they are not able to eliminate any of it. Every lead is going to be checked, so there's a great deal of work to do. Now, the information that they have so far still leads U.S. officials to believe that those involved in these attacks will likely be proven eventually to have links to the group led by Osama bin Laden, the fugitive Saudi terrorist who is apparently living in Afghanistan. However, the net has been spread wide. They are not ruling out other possibilities. There are some experts who say that the sophistication and highly coordinated nature of this attack suggests strongly that some kind of state sponsorship might have been involved. Officials, U.S. officials, saying there's no evidence of that so far. However, they're not ruling it out. Some of these outside experts saying that, pointing out that Iraq appears to have had some sort of a role in the Ramzi Youssef matter some years back, and that some involvement by Iraq cannot be ruled out. U.S. officials saying they have no evidence of that, but they are spreading a very wide net indeed. Now, officials are confirming that there were a couple of intercepts, presumably of voices, spoken voices, connected with the bin Laden group after the attacks that occurred yesterday, talking about how successful they were. They're not happy that that information got out, and you can expect at the briefings that the closed-door briefings of the House and Senate that will occur, or that are scheduled to occur later today with the FBI, CIA, and other leaders, briefing members of Congress, that there will be a strong appeal to them to avoid leaks of any kind of information about the investigations. A great deal of concern about that. That is a major concern as they go forward from here. Darren?
David, I imagine that's going to be a tough balancing act. On one hand, to keep up the integrity of the investigation, as you mentioned, you don't want leaks to go out, and yet this country is going to be so hungry for information and will only feel comforted if it knows that an investigation is moving forward.
Well, that's right. The law enforcement and intelligence authorities of the country want it clear they're doing their jobs, that they are making progress, that they are gaining intelligence. At the same time, they don't want to compromise their investigation, which is in early stages when it could easily be compromised. So it's going to be a difficult balancing act, as you say, and I nonetheless expect that we will be learning more as the day progresses as to what they've got so far. Darren?
Very good reason to check back with you at a later date, later hour. Thank you very much. David Ensor in our D.C. Bureau. Leon.
All right, we've got a lot on deck for you this morning. We're continuing to cover every aspect of this story this morning. We have a number of live press conferences that are going to be getting underway any minute now. We're keeping our eye right now on one in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, which is just south of Pittsburgh, which is the site of one of those plane crashes. The FBI is going to be having a briefing there. We're also expecting the FBI to have a briefing at Boston's Logan Airport, so we'll keep an eye on those as well. And we have also learned that Morgan Stanley Dean Witter, the company that occupied some 50 floors of one of those towers at the World Trade Center and have lost so many employees there, they are going to be having a press conference this hour as well. So we're going to have coverage of all three of those conferences for you. And we understand that President Bush is going to be meeting with congressional leaders, and we will have live coverage for you of that as well. So much more is coming up in just a couple of minutes. We'll take a break right now. We'll be back with more in just a bit. But in the meantime, we want to give you a look at this in the aftermath of this attack. We've heard so many stories from those who witnessed the devastation in New York and in Washington, and here now is a look at how one man experienced it.
They told me just to wait here at this semi-staging area, see if I can help, and that's what I'm doing. My name's Mark Heath. I'm a cardiac anesthesiologist at Columbia Presbyterian on 168th Street. We saw that 2 planes had flown into the World Trade Center, thought that they would need all hands on deck. So I hopped into some scrubs and grabbed some medical stuff and just grabbed an ambulance stops. I hopped in. Maybe leave the keys in the car so they can move it if they have to. Is there a staging area?
They're evacuating this whole area.
Yeah, but they have people who are hurt, right? They're going to pull them out.
Estimate is we probably lost 200 firefighters.
Oh, my God.
And God knows how many thousands of people.
Okay. So you want me to wait right here? Okay.
And stay away from any other high-rise building.
Okay. Let's just station up right here, okay?
All right.
Why don't we set up? We were instructed by a fire chief to start setting up a staging area right there. And the second building came down. I videoed what I could, got behind a car. I hope I live. I hope I live. It's coming down on me. Here it comes. I'm getting behind a car. Everything went black. My eyes are open, and unless I've been blinded, it is black as night. Just tried to breathe. I was behind a car. I tried to smash one of the car windows so that I could climb into the car and get some fresh air, but I couldn't break the window, so just sort of went down into the gutter under the car. I'm sorry I came down. I just had to help people. I think I actually said into the microphone, I sort of apologized to my family for going down and trying to help, because I really didn't think I was going to make it out. Okay, I'm going to have to go find people who need help, because I don't think I'm one of them. You okay, sir? Okay. Can I just get a toot off your respirator? Yeah. Can I get a toot? I'm seeing a couple of clean breaths. It was hard to see. Everybody's eyes were full of dust and stinging, so it's actually quite hard to see anything. Okay. Back to you. It's 10:41.
We're going to interrupt this piece right now. We want to take you live to the State Department. This is Richard Boucher taking questions and giving answers from reporters. Let's listen in.
Still apply, but it's as each mission looks at its security situation. Where does it feel safest? Where does it feel its vulnerabilities are? Are there vulnerabilities that we can correct by local action and things like that? And I would say the other thing is that around the world our missions have been asking host governments for support and assistance in all kinds of things, closing down streets, adding more guards, adding more patrols, having visible police presence, things like that. And in every single case we've gotten the support that we've asked for. Betsy?
Some countries have offered assistance to this country and, teams of people to help in the rubble at the World Trade Center and things like that. Has the U.S. responded to this? Have we accepted or rejected any offers of help?
We've been passing on all that information to the Federal Emergency Management Agency to make sure they know what's available from overseas sources. There's indeed been an outpouring of offers, specialized teams, bloods, just a whole lot of different things, equipment that people around the world have. I think we leave it to the federal authorities to sort of sort it out figure out if there is stuff that we would find useful. There's also, as you know, been an outpouring of support and assistance in the United States among our own people in terms of giving blood, or teams from the country coming up to help with the search. So I'm not sure that'll be necessary, but let the appropriate federal authorities sort it out. I'm not aware that we've asked for anything at this point. Terry?
This morning the Secretary said that there's an accumulating mound of evidence, and that very soon the government will make a decision on what they should do. Are you steering us away from the general assumption that this is bin Laden related? Is when he talks about the evidence, is that pointing any other direction that you can share with us?
I'm not steering you in any direction whatsoever. I'm not steering you in circles either. I'm just not into this. We're not pointing fingers. We're not saying who done it. We're going to do this carefully. We're going to maintain the ability to collect information and not reveal the sources of it. And we're going to, I'm sure, make the decisions in a careful manner at the right time. And I'm not intending to steer you towards, away, or in any direction whatsoever. I'm not driving that car.
Return to Washington, did the Secretary have telephone contact with the President?
No, they didn't actually talk until he got back to Washington. Rich Armitage, of course, the Deputy Secretary, was here, was working with the entire National Security team. And Secretary talked to Mr. Armitage numerous times throughout the day. They can talk when they need to, and it works out for both of them. It just didn't happen to be the case yesterday.
You said there were no warnings that led to the closing of the 50 embassies and missions, but have there
No
been...
particular warnings. There's obviously worldwide threats.
Well, that's what I want to
Yeah.
know. Have there been any new warnings that lead to new concern about subsequent actions?
I think the warnings that we've issued before in terms of the June 22nd warning, the update that we did last week, those all still apply. I don't have any new information on that, though.
Richard, the King of Morocco canceled a trip to Mauritania and returned home, and the King of Jordan was also on his way here and also returned home. Is there any possible relationship between that and this event, in the sense that there's a dichotomy between these governments have all condemned the attacks and the people in the streets are all supporting it?
Once again, I'm really down here to tell you that Secretary can't brief right now. I wasn't coming to deal with all the dichotomies in the world, so I really don't feel I can do that right now. The two windows look like early afternoon or later in the afternoon, so between now and the end of the day. I'm sorry. I don't want to get us all out.
Some of us have to go back to offices.
I know. I don't want to get us all, back here at some time because I speculate at this point. I got to talk.
Like not before 1, not before 2.
Can you give us a half-hour warning?
Yeah, we'll give you as much warning as possible, and half hour seems more than reasonable.
Okay.
Thank you.
We were listening to Richard Boucher, State Department spokesman. We'll wrap up what he had to say in just a moment, but while he was speaking, we got some very important information to us here at CNN. Word from the FAA. Of course, you are aware that flights were apparently or possibly supposed to resume across the U.S. at noon Eastern, 40 minutes from now. The FAA saying now that is not going to happen. They are not going to clear the hold on flights across the U.S. We don't have word yet on what the next deadline might be as to when flights might resume. But very importantly, FAA is saying those flights will not resume across the U.S. 40 minutes from now, as was originally scheduled. Leon.
Yeah, that's going to complicate matters for quite a few people, because I heard reports this morning of people who have been driving from city to city to try to get ahead of their travel plans for the day to perhaps get to the city they were going to leave on their connecting flight out of. And now it's going to complicate matters even further for them. So we'll keep our eyes on that and report you the latest details as we get them here. In the meantime, though, let's check in now with our Kate Stowe, who's on Capitol Hill. Kate?
Leon, Congress has been in session now for just over an hour, both the Senate and the House taking a little break right now. But on both sides, in both chambers, what we're hearing and what we're seeing is raw emotion from members of Congress, people talking about the horrific events of yesterday. There are themes emerging. One theme that the Congress is unified, that there are no party lines here anymore. These attacks were attacks on the U.S.'s freedom. They were acts of cowardice, and Congress is prepared to fight whoever is responsible.
Make no mistake, this was an act of war against the United States and all of our people. And we will not be divided. All of us, the President the Congress, and the American people are today and will be tomorrow, and in all the tomorrows, totally and completely united in our determination to begin the process of healing and to take swift action to see that the people who committed this horrible crime are properly punished. May God shed His grace on this great and wonderful country and all of our people.
Dick Gephardt getting a standing ovation for his comments, echoed in the Senate chamber by Senator Daschle and Senator Lott. Senator Charles Schumer, the senior senator from New York, also spoke a short time ago. He talked very emotionally. He talked about his daughter who goes to school at a building right next door to the Twin Towers, and how for 2 hours he and his wife struggled to find her. They weren't sure of her whereabouts. They did find her. Then he talked about the others who are missing in New York City.
Everyone in New York right now knows somebody who's missing. I know of a call. Someone on the 104th floor worked for the good firm of Cantor and Fitzgerald. We can't find hardly anybody from that firm, who called his parents, told them he loved him, and they haven't heard from him since.
That emotion leading up to a vote later tonight. We expect to hear from every senator and every House member today about these terrible events, but they are voting on this. This is a resolution, a joint resolution of the House and the Senate, bipartisan. It says the Senate and House of Representatives condemn in the strongest possible terms the terrorists. It talks about extending deep condolences. We are certain the United States people will stand united. We commend the heroic actions of the rescue workers, volunteers, and state and local officials. This resolution goes on to thank foreign leaders and individuals who have expressed solidarity with the United States. It says we are committed to support increased resources in, quote, the war to eradicate terrorism. Talks about supporting the president. And finally, it declares that September 12th, 2001 shall be a national day of unity and mourning, and that when the Congress adjourns on this legislative day, which we expect to be much later on this evening, it stands adjourned out of respect to the victims of the terrorist attacks. Leon, back to you.
All right, thank you very much, Kate Snow on Capitol Hill. You know, many are going to withhold the process of mourning until at least the process of finding out who is inside that building is complete. Let's go up to New York now. Paula's standing by on the roof. Paula?
Thanks so much, Leon. We have talked so much this morning about how New Yorkers are shattered by the loss of life here. We certainly don't understand the magnitude of the tragedy just yet. But I want to check in with Gary Brees right now, who is the Executive Director of the International Association of Fire Chiefs. Welcome. Thank you very much for joining us this morning, sir.
Good morning.
What I want to say is, just based on the reaction I've gotten from people in the street, the news that in many ways has hit New Yorkers the hardest is that some 260 firefighters and police officers are believed dead. 260 perhaps of the initial 400 firefighters that were sent into the line of duty. The city of New York has lost its fire chief as well as its deputy fire chief. What kind of message do you have for the rest of the country today about the kinds of risks you all take on day in and day out?
Well, the firefighters of this nation are doing exactly what firefighters are supposed to do, setting aside their own grief, their own passion, and beginning to search for survivors. That's the message we need to deliver to the American public today, is that the fire service is moving forward to do everything that it possibly can to identify, locate, and rescue survivors.
I understand that, and I understand the enormous commitment all of you make to your jobs, and yet I was talking with one of our reporters earlier this morning, Gary Tuchman, who was talking about how, and indeed, this enormous loss is got to affect the morale of these firefighters who still have to go to work and deal with the gruesomeness of this tragedy here.
It affects every firefighter in the nation. We have now on the ground in New York City 12 urban search and rescue teams that are beginning the work of organizing the rescue effort to assist the New York City Fire Department. This will be a tremendous effort, well beyond anything we've ever attempted in the past. If you go back to Oklahoma City, you recognize that it took us working 24 hours a day on a 5-story building, 10 days to clear that site. The enormity of this situation in New York City is beyond anybody's imagination, but you can rest assured that the fire service will not rest until every potential survivor has been located and a rescue attempt has been made and as many casualties have been removed from the situation as possible.
This horrible loss comes on the heels of New York City losing many, many other firefighters here to catastrophes. Have you given any thought to setting up any kind of fund for the family members of those who've been lost?
Those discussions are initially taking place right now, but quite frankly, we are focused on providing as much assistance as we can to both the New York City Fire Department as well as the Arlington County Fire Department for the Pentagon rescues. We have 2 sites that are going on with 16 urban search and rescue teams and thousands of firefighters working on this issue on both of these sites.
All right.
That's the first priority today.
All right. Gary, you just mentioned the 16 urban search and rescue teams. Give us, as to the best of your knowledge, what they're going to confront in not only the rescue operation part of this, but the cleanup.
Well, the biggest factor we're working against right now is time. About 90% of the survivors come out in the first 24 hours, and we're on that time deadline right now. That's why it's so important that these teams are organized, get in to begin working as quickly as possible, working with the firefighters that are in New York City now and getting the rescues attempted and succeeded. The longer we go into this rescue effort, the less chance we have of recovering survivors. But we will stay there as long as there's any potential at all for rescuing survivors.
I know you've looked at the same gruesome pictures I have. I have been sickened for over 24 hours now. I know you guys always have hope you're going to find folks in debris, but when you look at these horrific images, are you surprised that so far 9 folks have been rescued, including 6 firefighters and 3 police officers and possibly 2 civilians shortly?
We're not surprised at all that so few rescues are being made.
I'm actually suggesting the opposite, the fact that 11 people could potentially be found alive. I mean, we know that 9 have already been rescued and 2 are in the process of being rescued.
Right.
It seems a miracle to those of us that are looking at this debris, the tons and tons of debris.
Well, understand that we don't know exactly where those rescues came from in Lower Manhattan. We don't know if they came from the World Trade Center buildings themselves or surrounding buildings. There's probably 10 or 15 buildings that surround the World Trade Center that need to be searched, that are partially collapsed. So there's plenty of opportunities to find both rescuers and civilians.
Gary, before we let you go, any final thoughts as to what your colleagues have experienced and will experience in the weeks to come? All right, unfortunately, we lost Gary Brees, but I think he's given us some very good insights as to how seriously these firefighters approach their jobs, how willing they are to take on the risks they do, and how willing they will continue to be to go into this rubble of this massive tragedy to attempt to rescue folks. I think the most important point Gary just made, that the majority of your rescues, or 90% of them, will happen within 24 hours of the initial impact of an explosion or a fire. And we continue to wish the New York City Fire Department and all these urban rescue teams that have come here to help out very good luck indeed as they go about this dreadful process of trying to find people alive, and the tons and tons of concrete and cement and what some folks have likened this morning to nuclear winter. Darren, that's it from New York for the time being, and we'll come back to you later.
Paula, thank you very much. I know the fire officials, as you're talking to them, they understand the reality of what they face, and as you reflected across America, the hope still goes on that many more people will be rescued from that rubble in New York City and perhaps even at the Pentagon. Meanwhile, while you were talking to fire officials, 2 important developments to tell our viewers about as we seek more information. At 3 p.m. Eastern, that's about 3.5 hours from right now, the FBI will be holding a news conference from headquarters in Washington, D.C. That FBI news conference will feature the new head of the FBI, Robert Mueller. Also, the Attorney General John Ashcroft will be at that news conference. Of course, you will see that live here on CNN. We told you a few minutes ago, for you travelers out there, those of you who have loved ones that are stuck somewhere across America or perhaps overseas, noon Eastern today, a half hour from now, was the original time set as the possible lifting of that ban by the FAA for flights to resume over U.S. airspace. We did get word a few minutes ago that the FAA is pushing back that time, that at 12 noon. We don't have word quite yet, I believe, as to when the new time estimation will be. Let's bring our Patty Davis in, who's been following this part of the story for us. Patty, are you getting any word now as to when the FAA says flights might resume across the U.S.?
Well, Darren, what the FAA is saying specifically is that the 12 noon was the earliest time that it might reopen U.S. airspace to commercial flights. What it is saying now at this point is that decision now is up to the White House. That announcement will be made by the White House in consultation with the Department of Transportation. Now, the Department of Transportation Secretary Norman Mineta was scheduled to hold a press conference about an hour ago. That was canceled. He was to have details on exactly the security measures, how that would happen in terms of the airspace, etc. But that was canceled. We're now told that the White House will be making the announcement on when the airspace will be reopened. So FAA saying that noon now possibly not the target time for reopening U.S. airspace. Now, Washington Airport Authority, the Metropolitan Airport Authority spokeswoman tells me, as far as Washington, Reagan, and Dulles airports are concerned, she is not expecting either of those airports to have any flights today. No airlines have filed any flight plans at those two airports. Now, I have some details on a few airlines here. American Airlines does say that it may resume some flights when airspace is reopened. United Airlines is saying that it does not plan any scheduled flights before 3 p.m. Central Time. And of course, this is all up to whether or not the airspace is opened, if and when.
Patty, if you're still with us there, so you're saying it's not the Transportation Department or the FAA that's going to make that announcement, the White House. But is the White House saying when they'll make that announcement? I have to imagine there are a lot of frustrated travelers stuck across the U.S.
Yeah, we're actually just told now that no decision has been made exactly when U.S. airspace will open. That hopefully we'll hear more about that later today. Delta Airlines also saying that it has canceled flights through 6 p.m. Eastern today. So it's obviously up to what the federal government decides to do. No decision made at this point in terms of when that airspace will be reopened. Darren.
All right. Patty Davis in Washington. Patty, that is going to be frustrating news, as I mentioned, for a lot of people who are stuck. Paula, you're going to have this combination, this balancing act of people who, of course, want the airways to be safe and yet probably very anxious to get home to their families and loved ones.
Understand that. Thanks so much. We wanted to bring you quickly up to date on what is going on here. Earlier this morning, we talked with Joe Albaugh, who is the head of the Federal Emergency Management Agency. He talked to us about the 4 urban, specially trained search and rescue teams that will be joining the teams already here. It's hard to get a fix on the total numbers involved, but the head of the fire chiefs was just saying he believed in addition to that, 16 other urban search and rescue teams would be joining the efforts of Joe Albaugh's team. Right now I want to go to Gary Tuckman, who joins us from Ground Zero for an update on what kind of rescue operations are taking place right now. Gary?
Well, Paula, the World Trade Center was the type of landmark that even though we know full well what happened, I still expect to turn around and see it standing there. Instead, we just see the skeleton of what was the South Tower. We come to you from Church Street and Chambers Street. This intersection is next to a subway station called Chambers World Trade Center, but there no longer is a World Trade Center. This neighborhood now is completely closed to the public, only open to emergency officials right now, police, fire, FBI, members of the National Guard are behind me right now doing everything they can to protect the area. And we've seen a lot of sights today coming down the street right next to me. We've seen vehicles carrying body bags. It was very solemn, very sad for us to see. We've also seen many large flatbed trucks carrying wreckage. We are told by New York City officials that some of the wreckage is up to 100 feet high right next to where the World Trade Centers used to be. And we've also seen many incinerated cars and trucks that have come on flatbed trucks and that are being disposed. But there also has been some good news. Officials here tell us that 9 survivors have been found. 6 of them are fire officials, 3 of them are policemen. The story of the rescue of one of the policemen is an unbelievable story. We are told this policeman was trapped under wreckage. His legs were trapped under wreckage, but because he had worked at the World Trade Center building, he knew exactly where he was. He couldn't see daylight at all. He was under the wreckage, but he had his cell phone with him. He called up on the cell phone and said, I know where I am. Come over here in this area and look. He was in a courtyard between where the 2 towers used to be. They came over, they dug, they found him, but they thought they were going to have to amputate one of his legs to get him out. As you may recall, after the Oklahoma City disaster, one of the women who was found, who has survived, who is still alive today, she had to have her leg amputated to be cut out of the wreckage. They thought they were going to have to do it in this case. As it turned out, they did not have to amputate his leg. He was taken away in an ambulance, and it said that he will be fine. With us right now is a gentleman by the name of Robert Galinsky. Robert is a common, everyday citizen who got to the scene very early yesterday and was allowed to participate in the search in the World Trade Center site. Now, first of all, tell me what you saw when you were there.
Well, first, I want to say I came here because we're Americans are not going to, New Yorkers are not going to sit back and grieve forever. And as that, I needed to take some action and show that, New York, we're standing up and we're doing what we need to do. I got down here at 6:30 this morning. I heard last night that they were going to have volunteers come in. I came in. On the way in, I saw, ankle-high dust, twisted buses and fire trucks blown out, cars blown out, buildings that aren't really make it on the air. Other buildings around the Trade Center with windows that were smashed in. Starbucks had its windows smashed in, which isn't a bad thing.
What was this experience like?
It was tough because it was very dangerous. We were right ground zero in World Trade Center Tower 1, digging, trying to find people. We found 2, unfortunately, people that were not alive.
Robert Galinsky, thank you very much for joining us. We appreciate it.
Believed by the Massachusetts Port Authority, which has already announced that big security changes will be made at Logan Airport, where 2 of the planes were hijacked, including no more curbside luggage checkups.
Including full compliance with the new security requirements being imposed on all U.S. airports. We received specific guidance on these measures from the FAA a short time ago. And I'm proud to say that many of these measures have been in place at Logan for many years. In addition, I spoke with Governor Swift this morning, and she has instructed us to go beyond these FAA requirements by placing state police at all security checkpoints at Logan Airport. With the new FAA requirements and the additional security at Logan, we are confident that when the airport is reopened, the safety of the traveling public will be ensured. I'm going to turn this over to our other speakers. Let me just say that due to the ongoing investigation and for the sake of public safety, the law enforcement officials who are here with us today are limited in the questions that they can answer and the facts that they can confirm. Let me first ask Tom Kinton, the Director of Aviation for Logan Airport, to speak.
Good morning. As Ginny mentioned, we are focused on a reopening of this airport, and I cannot tell you what time that will occur. I'm going to go through a number of issues, summarizing the guidance that we have been given by FAA, both the airlines and the airport operator, that has to be done and has to be in place before this airport can open. A lot of it, as you will see, will take a lot of time, and we are going to take our time. And if we have to delay the reopening of this airport, as others open around the country, we will delay the reopening to get it done and get it right. First of all, let me reemphasize that the guidance is for all U.S. airports. It will begin with immediately evacuation of all terminals and sweeping of K-9 teams, explosive K-9 teams. Increased presence of uniformed personnel, plainclothes security personnel, and others in all areas of the airport. And as you heard mentioned, we will be staffing the security checkpoints with uniformed state police, which goes beyond the guidance given to us by FAA. Be increasing the frequency of random ID checks in the secured areas of Logan Airport. We will secure, we already have them in place, bomb detection teams for quick response here at Logan Airport. We will be reducing the number of operational access points into the airport. We will also discontinue curbside check-in and remove unauthorized vehicles that are within 300 feet of any terminal building. And that point there is probably one of the most time-consuming things we have to accomplish, because presently there are over 9,000 vehicles parked at Logan Airport. One of the garages, Terminal B, has almost 2,500 vehicles, and it needs to be emptied. We are in the process of doing that and relocating those cars to Suffolk Downs, and we will not reopen that terminal, certainly, and perhaps not the airport, until that task is completed. There is FAA is prohibiting the sale or use of knives, regardless of any size, in any sterile areas of the airport. That includes concession operators, food and beverage, as well as any retail operators that may sell such items. That means anything metal or plastic. Airport operators will develop an awareness plan to keep all airport employees informed about security, and the airport operators and the FAA shall review and reevaluate these contingency plans for ongoing airport security threats that may develop. Airlines will not be accepting cargo or mail, and prior to passenger boarding of any airplanes, those aircraft must undergo a comprehensive search. That's each and every flight before they are boarded by passengers. And as I said at the beginning, we do not have an estimate on when this airport will reopen. Possibly it could be for some relocation of flights that are on the ground, ferrying empty airplanes back into position later today. And again, no estimate on reopening the airport for commercial flights until we have a better handle on both the airline responsibility here and the airport operator responsibilities being fulfilled. We've already had an air carrier meeting. We held it this morning. This work is underway, and we'll be meeting with the air carriers later this afternoon to update and keep the traveling public updated relative to the reopening of Logan Airport. Thank you.
All right, you want me to go?
The next speaker is Colonel John DeFava, Massachusetts State Police.
Thank you, Director. Good morning. The Massachusetts State Police is prepared to provide all necessary resources to assist the Massport Authority in reaching and surpassing those new security measures as mandated by the FAA. These resources will include additional personnel, special and tactical units such as explosive ordnance disposal personnel, and canines that are capable of sniffing out explosives. These measures will stay in place indefinitely to ensure the safety of the public at the airport. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Charlie Prouty, FBI Special Agent in Charge, Boston.
Thank you, Director. I want to reassure all New England citizens that your law enforcement is aggressively investigating this horrific event. First of all, my heart goes out to the victims and the families in this tragedy. Because this appears to be a terrorist attack, the FBI will be taking lead investigative status in this. We set up a command post in the FBI office in Boston yesterday as soon as we received notice of the hijacking. This is a joint command post with State Department, ATF, Customs, the Massachusetts State Police, OSI, Boston Police Department, Department of Transportation, U.S. Secret Service, and the U.S. Marshals represented. We're also involved in Massport's command post at Logan Airport. We'll continue to man these command posts and continue our joint investigations around the clock until all investigations have been completed. We are coordinating our investigation with FBI headquarters and with other federal agencies. A website and a toll-free tip line has been established.
At Logan Airport, the airport where hijackers successfully hijacked two commercial airliners yesterday. They're talking about the number of regulations they will follow by the FAA. In addition to that, further strength they will put in place to make the public safe, among other things. They're now going to have uniformed state police officers joining the security officers on duty. Logan Airport has taken a deep hit by public perception today. There is a feeling, according to Bill Delaney, that security there has been loose in the past, and I think the fact that the Massport announced today that they will do no more curbside check-in, that they will remove any vehicles that are standing within 300 feet of the curb from the area, pointedly shows how seriously they're taking the scrutiny of the nation. Before I go on, I just want to share one little fact with you that is being reported in the Boston Herald. The Boston Globe has some of this information, but not all of it. It is now suspected that the hijackers were able to carry off what they did by not bringing guns on board the two planes in Boston, but by using shaving kits and other carry-on luggage to smuggle knife-like weapons made up of plastic handles embedded with razor blades. Now, these are sources familiar with the investigation talking to the Boston Herald, and that is consistent with apparently a flight attendant. Cell phone calls indicated as well. Now, I want to show you one of the latest pictures of what is going on here in New York City. You have the USS George Washington now moving into New York Harbor. It will patrol the waters off of New York City. In addition to that, a number of other naval vessels are on the move right now. Some headed towards New York City, some coming to the Washington, D.C. area to even help with some of the medical challenges that both cities are confronting at the moment. It is interesting to note that President Bush announced earlier today that he had asked for a spending resolution that would enable the United States to spend, quote, whatever it takes to deal with the magnitude of this horrendous tragedy that is confronting our nation. And I will have some more details for you in a moment or two. Back to Darren, who joins us from Atlanta.
Paula, thank you very much. Of course, people across the country are looking toward the rescue efforts that are taking place. We're showing a live picture now from New York City. As we mentioned, and Paula has told us earlier, about 11 people have been rescued so far. As time goes on, fire officials have explained to us it becomes more difficult to do their job of rescuing. However, hope and prayers from across the country going towards that rescue site, both in New York City and also a hope toward the Pentagon. Leon.
Well, Darren, you know, the only site that New York is not the only site that we have to keep our eyes on. Washington as well. Let's go there now. Bob Franken checking in from the Pentagon. Bob?
Oh, Leon, we're about to show you something quite remarkable. You, of course, have heard that every effort will be made to investigate this case. There will be an exhaustive search for evidence. Well, we just had a demonstration of that right in front of our cameras. The FBI obviously trying to make the point for the world to see. FBI agents fanned out just about 20 feet from where we are right now, fanned out in a grassy area that was close to the path of the airplane that crashed into the Pentagon, looking very closely at the ground, sweeping the ground, so to speak, looking for anything that might be relevant, looking for even the smallest little piece of information that might provide some evidence that would be useful in the investigation of this particular part of this the three planes that crashed into various buildings. This one was an American Airlines 757. It crashed into the Pentagon about 26 hours ago. 26 hours ago. The investigation is going full tilt, as is the effort to try and see just how bad the damage is inside and just how many casualties there are. We're hearing now that they've located maybe scores of bodies. By scores, I mean under 100 located, but perhaps not removed from the building. Pentagon is not giving out actual figures. Of course, there have been estimates that there could be several hundred people whose lives were lost here, although various Pentagon officials do not in fact agree that it's going to be that high. But while that search is going on, and it's very fitful because of the precarious nature of the building, many of the families and loved ones of some of the friends and loved ones of the people who are missing inside can only stand here and watch.
I told her that her father was missing and that when I knew, I would tell her. If he does come out in any type of capacity, that I will be one of the first ones there.
They sent in some dogs, but that there was no sign of life. But that, what else? That it might be several days before they can even start pulling out bodies.
And Leon, while the search is being conducted in a very painstaking way, firemen are still trying to put out the blaze, which on a spot basis has spread throughout much of the building. Leon?
All right, thanks to Bob Franken, standing by there at that focal point for us there in Washington, the Pentagon. Now, up to New York and Paula.
All right, we're going to head back to what is the second news conference of the day held by New York Mayor Rudy Giuliani. Let's listen in. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to listen in right now because we're having audio difficulties. I think we need to make everyone in the journalism field is a little hampered today because the number of streets blocked, and it's tough for our equipment to get in where it needs to get in.
And let's hope. Yes, we have a tremendous number of volunteers. We have more volunteers than we know what to do with right now. But please continue to volunteer because we're going to need you tomorrow and the next day and the day after. And, you know, our firefighters and police officers are going to get pretty exhausted after a period of time. So the outpouring of volunteers has been tremendous, and we're very, very thankful for that. And the city, the people of the city, their spirit is tremendous. And I said that yesterday, and I'll say it again. This city is the greatest city in the world. It has the greatest people, and a bunch of cowardly terrorists can't make us fearful. We're stronger than they are. We're better than they are. And people of the city proved it yesterday. They're going to prove it today. And they're going to be a great example of what Americans are like. Thank you.
Thank you. City giving New Yorkers a great deal of credit for, okay, you've just heard the mayor of New York City giving New Yorkers a great deal of credit for their outpouring of support. It might be interesting to remind viewers last night that, in fact, it was Senator John Warner who said yesterday will go down as one of the worst days in history. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he said in the end it may be our finest hour, and he was referring to the collective strength that we have seen exhibited in this nation as we all come together to try to get a better grasp of what this is that has happened to our nation. The mayor saying there's been such an outpouring of support to help in some of the cleanup operations. He's turned people away, but he wants them to know he probably will need their help in the days to come. One thing, too, that the medical facilities are desperate in need of is in blood, and apparently New Yorkers are turning out by the thousands again today to donate blood. So once again, I think, as the mayor said, this shows the strength and the indomitable spirit of the folks who live here. We're going to show you one more time a live picture of what the rescue operation continues to look like at this hour. Gary Tuckman has been at Ground Zero all day long. He's had the opportunity to interview police officers, firefighters, paramedics. Gary, anything new?
Well, Paula, many of the emergency workers here are truly starting to seriously realize something, that they have their work cut out for them. There may be hundreds or thousands of bodies. There also may still be survivors. There were two 110-story buildings that plummeted behind me and a 47-story building. And all that wreckage is 3 blocks behind me. And some of the wreckage, according to New York officials, is 100 feet tall. And you also have, and this is something we tend to forget over the last 25 hours, there are 2 huge aircraft here that are in many pieces. As a matter of fact, there's a building right behind me. It's hard for you to see in the smoke, but it's before where the World Trade Center used to stand. The World Trade Center, the South Tower, stood where you see that skeleton right there right now. It's a skeleton of poles. 2 buildings in front of it on the right is where authorities told us one of the jet's engines landed. It landed on the roof and then fell on the street, and it's already been cleaned up, according to officials. An interesting little factoid here. The largest landfill in the world is in Staten Island, New York. It's called the Fresh Kills Landfill. For many years, New Yorkers, particularly Staten Islanders, were telling New York City, please close it down. It makes Staten Island smell. It's the largest landfill in the world. And Rudy Giuliani, a couple of years ago, decided he would close it down. A couple of years ago, it shut down completely. There was never supposed to be any more garbage put into it. However, it's now been reopened to take the wreckage of this disaster that has changed New York City forever. Paula, back to you.
Gary, your audio isn't all that clean right now, but if you mention this, pardon me because I didn't hear it, could you please update us again on the number of folks who have been successfully taken from the rubble of what used to be the World Trade Centers?
What we are being told right now by rescue authorities who are on the scene, and one thing we must point out, we have not seen these rescues ourselves, and normally we love as reporters to see things with our own eyes to know we can verify them. There's a lot of nervous people here, a lot of scared rescuers, a lot of heroic rescuers. We have to rely on what they're telling us right now in a very confusing time. But they are telling us that 9 people have been rescued from the rubble. 6 of them New York City firemen, 3 of them police officials from the Port Authority of New York. The Port Authority is the agency that owns the World Trade Center building and runs the airport here in New York City. Paula?
Because we have some new developments coming from Atlanta to report. Darren?
All right, Paula, thank you very much. We want to take our viewers now live to Pennsylvania. It is a news conference with the FBI with the latest on the plane that crashed there. Let's listen in.
Wallace Miller. We don't have much to add from yesterday's press conference. However, we will go over some of the things that we are doing. Presently, we have over 200 personnel on site from the FBI, Pennsylvania State Police, ATF, NTSB, FAA, Postal, IRS, Civil Air Patrol, the Somerset County Coroners I mentioned, as well as representatives of United Airlines, their aircraft scene team. This morning, members of our Hazardous Materials Response Unit conducted an assessment of the crime scene, particularly the area around the crater. Their assessment was to determine levels of toxicity and flammability